Blooming Black, Part 2. Chapter 14. The tourney was lovely. No idea what happened other than Penny sitting beside me in her heavy cloak, her hand in mine, clinging to me like we were in a car. She'd signed my contract. She would marry me and see me every day. Afterwards, I walked her to a room, missing her bare feet so I could carry her. "Good night," she murmured before she kissed me, so soft, slow, sweet that my knees went weak. "Dream of me." She nodded and slipped inside, leaving me standing like I'd been hit by a Mack truck. I shook my head and turned away. I had things to do. I had to figure out the mess in Darkside. Of course I did. But it was so much more interesting to stare at Penny Lake. I reached into my pocket, pulling out the location spell. Hopefully this would not end up in the loss of a limb. I concentrated on everything I knew about the subtle sorcerer, his men, Jasper's uncertain signature, and the misdirection spell over my men. The paper blazed with flame and burned a hole into space and matter, opening up a trail that I followed, chasing that spark that stayed just out of reach. It was like running through a worm's body, darkness all around and the scent of icky. I was an idiot to trust a Darksider mage who wanted to destroy me. I'd about decided to step out of the wormhole and figure out things from there when the spark burned another hole in space and time, letting me out on the side of the road, thick woods on either side before it flickered out. I spelled myself quickly for defense and vision along with a few other things. I scanned my surroundings. I knew this road. I knew these woods. I left the pavement and headed towards the gate I had a key for. My fingerprints and eye scan were the keys. I walked the grounds of Huntsman Manor. Apparently, I was my own wicked sorcerer. Was that possible? Anything was possible, but somehow I doubted it. I adjusted my cuffs and couldn't help but notice how exquisitely the coat moved. I was a work of art, and the best part of all was that I still felt like I carried Penny with me. I searched the grounds thoroughly, but saw no one other than the usual guards. They would notice anyone who wasn't a huntsman. I had so many spells on me the moment I entered the grounds: protection, strength, rejuvenation, even faster brain synapses. I headed for the house, letting the branches crackle beneath my feet. They may as well know I was there. When I got to the foyer, I wiped my feet before entering the well-polished hall. Jasper? I heard a rustling from the library, but not a Jasper rustle. I stopped walking. My father was here. My father, who had abandoned me and society when I'd returned ruined from Darkside, was at Huntsman Manor, resuming the mantle of authority he'd dumped on me so long before. He'd come right after the Creek attack. The Creek hadn't attacked since. I'd shown him my chest. He knew that I owned Penny, that she owned me. I would be wonderful bait after he'd finished using me and my armies to get what he wanted. What did he want? I closed my eyes for a moment. It wasn't possible. Huntsman was impossible to breach. Generations of powerful mages had made certain of it, but this sorcerer had been able to deceive Jasper and steal an army. Why not deceive all of Dayside and steal a whole world? I walked up the stairs towards the library, trying to channel my most arrogant, indifferent personality. I had several to choose from. He'd dressed me in gems. Were they what had thrown me off, made me unable to discern which side I was fighting on? I walked right in the door and headed for the bar. I noticed right away the difference in liquor. Instead of the usual sharp liquors, there was a motley of mellowed, golden ales and whiskies. "Do you want one?" I asked, not looking at the man sitting in front of the fireplace in his boating clothing. Maybe he'd murdered my father. I felt very close to nothing about that, which proved the sort of mage I was. This monstrous mage was a better father than mine. That was sort of humorous. You haven't been in Darkside for a few nights. I turned and carried my glass over and sprawled into the chair opposite him. You know that I have to balance business with pleasure. I'm not sure which is business and which is pleasure. It's so pleasant to slice through Darksiders. The girl, did she accept your contract? I finally met his eyes. My eyes looked back at me. It was an extremely good glamour. He didn't look broken, though. I should have realized he wasn't my father immediately. She did. Congratulate me. Are you going to come to the wedding? We're having it at her mother's house. He smiled, a dry smile that made my stomach curl. That was not my father's smile. That was the smile of someone who knew how to manipulate the world and never get caught. It was also the smile of a mage who was going to find his betraying witch and rip her up. I'll make time for it in my busy schedule. He waved his hand in a gesture towards the fire where he was relaxing, as though he had nothing at all to do. "You've done excellent work. I was examining the books, and it seems that Huntsman Inc. has thrived in your care. Another thing, my father didn't give that sort of compliment. He gave semi-compliments, but they were always detailed. He would have said the merger between the aircraft productions facility and Huntsman required finesse. So many other things now that I was paying attention. The way he lounged like he was actually good at lounging. Not like my father who never was still if he weren't asleep. My father who had searched Darkside with his armies until he'd found me, never resting until he'd pulled me against his chest, only to turn his back and never look at me again afterwards. Naturally, I'm your most gifted progeny. How long are you going to look over my shoulder until you're satisfied that I'm not running the machine into the ground? If you're going to stay for a while, why don't you take over more business aspects so that I can have some free time? What would you do with more free time? Would you go to Darkside to battle the sorcerer?" I shrugged and tossed back the glass of golden whiskey. It burned beautifully, certainly. "Tell me about him. You're still here, so I imagine he's a more significant problem than I thought." His eyes flickered with something, amusement maybe. "Oh, he's a terrible monster. He's become more powerful with every conflict. It's as though he can turn every obstacle to his advantage. He sounds magnificent. Perhaps he's taking interns." He raised an eyebrow. "This is serious." I raised my hand and the bottle flew across the room and into my hand. "I'd need a bottle. If it gets too serious, I can always follow in your noble footsteps and abandon my family, my fortune, my name. Tell me, what does the sorcerer want? Can we give it to him, or is he after something more amorphous? Domination of worlds or something like that?" He studied me for a long time while I drank and didn't notice the way he was taking me apart. "I have put a great deal of thought to the matter. He wants the girl. Since you belong to her, he'll want you as well." "Willie, it's so pleasant to be wanted. Tell me, Dad, how shall we defeat him? Any more magical gems to give me?" "You're upset." I smiled blandly over the beautifully cut glass. "I am. I've been fighting on the wrong side of the battle. Can you imagine? You've been deceived. You should have stayed on your yacht. Watch your tone. I'm still your father." I stood up and tossed back the glass. "Am I your son? Look at you. A Daysider mage who can't even tell which side you're fighting. What makes you think that Mother didn't find another mage to sink her teeth into?" He stood slowly, fury infusing him like my father couldn't even begin to contain. "Here we go. You will apologize for defacing your mother's memory." "Why? You've slept with how many human women since she died? You didn't even wait for her corpse to cool before you were looking for a diversion. I know you can't stand to look at me, the one who killed her. But maybe you could have trained me a little more carefully, so I had the slightest idea what to do with a witch who loves me." He inhaled sharply. "She loves you?" "I feel like I must love her. I can't be like you, ruined over a witch, but I am. The thing about her is that she loves everyone. She touches other mages and expects me not to rip her arms off. She doesn't pretend not to love other mages, witches, humans, mice. I ran my hand through my hair, then poured myself another drink. My hand was shaking. "She loves you. Did she make you that coat?" "I'm never taking it off again. I don't have time to deal with Darkside right now. I'm trying to not be in love with a witch." "I see," he sighed. "I understand. It's a pity. Someone needs to clear up this business." "Yeah." "Someone would. Damn, no more blowing off some steam in Darkside. No, I'd have to actually investigate every single battle before I won it. How many wars were our merc companies involved in? Probably more all the time if the paperwork the sorcerer across from me was looking at was any indication. No slipping into Penny's bed to nibble on her hair. I had to get this cleared up before Valentine's Day. I couldn't exactly marry her if my father was replaced by a sorcerer who wanted to eat her up for dinner. I wanted to eat her for dinner. And breakfast. I had to focus. The sorcerer gave me a fatherly smile. Had he cursed Penny, I would rip him apart. Oh, I would enjoy that after he'd made me feel like I had a father again. "Drake, I understand. You're under the most powerful spell in the world. You can't fight love." "No. What about hate? You're so wise all of a sudden." I ran a hand through my hair, displaying my frustration. "I have to see her. I sounded so sincere." He nodded. "Take care of your witch. I'll take care of everything else." Words to give me goosebumps. I sighed and nodded before I stepped through side, from an alley to a beach, in the middle of the burning lands, and a half-dozen more steps until I was certain he wasn't following me. I came out on the stretch of glittering pale sand that reflected the starlight like diamonds. There wasn't enough atmosphere here to hold the mists and smog, so the stars were bright and crisp above me and beneath my boots as I walked. It was cold but warm at the same time, as in the coat provided shelter from the elements, but I could still feel the temperature and air quality as though I were naked. It became harder to get enough oxygen, but I was spelled, and even if I wasn't, that sort of thing didn't bother me anymore. Above me, I heard the rush of wings, and then an enormous body blocked out the stars in the shape of a dragon. I knew that silhouette, but it wasn't mine. "Good evening, Princess. Enjoying the evening air?" She growled and vanished without so much as a whisper of disrupted wind. I kept walking. The sorcerer was manipulative, but not commanding. He might have been able to break my mind, bend me to his will, but he much preferred me to fight for him while I thought I was fighting against him. It suited his sense of irony and whimsy, probably. He'd envied the coat. He wanted it like he wanted her. Pitch or penny, I'd say both. They seemed to come as a set. I whistled low and long. A few seconds later I heard beating against the air. The long, low roar rumbled through me, and I started to run. I pushed myself as I raced across the star-studded sands until I leapt up, higher and higher until I reached the top of my arc. I landed lightly on Jello's dark green back. My boots balanced carefully over his spine. For a long time I stood there, balanced, arms outstretched, while the wind rushed around me beneath a million stars. Penny's coat picked up every sensation as though it were bare skin against the frigid night air. Jello wouldn't fit in a bath with me and Penny, to be sure, but we could come up with some kind of bed. A seabed, maybe. Penny might have trouble breathing underwater. I shook my head and walked down his back to the place between neck and shoulders where I'd trained the spikes down so I could sit without impaling myself. "You smell of sorcerer." I leaned back on my custom-created backrest. "Jello, it seems that I've been under the influence of one. He's taken over my armies." The dragon snorted. I had no way of knowing if he was talking out loud or in my head. He could do both, and they seemed the same. "We should eat him." "He's a deception, sorcerer. We'd just eat someone we thought was him but turned out to be someone else. Someone he wanted dead." "No." "Has he touched the treasure?" I felt his anxiety and my own heart pounded in response. "She's safe. She should be here where we can guard her. She doesn't know that she's a dragon's horde. She might not like that." He made a grumbling, snorting sound that came out as a ball of fire arsing across the starry sky. "She likes—" "Yes, she does. She signed the contract. She already belonged to us." "Yes, but now she knows it." I shook my head. Jello had been fixated on her ever since the Kree battle when she'd stroked him and he'd admired her red-gold hair. "How does she taste?" "Very sweet. Too sweet. She's delicate, Jello. We have to be gentle with her." Another fireball exploded into the night, gentle. "We will not eat her?" I nodded. "Now that we got that out of the way, would you like to visit some battles?" "Eat Darksiders." "Actually, we're going to chat with them. I have to be a cautious mage, investigate the battles, and mark their sides. You can do that, can't you?" The dragon had an intricate map of the entire world of Darkside inside his mind, and he could mark areas as good for hunting, cold, warm, filled with danger and delights, that sort of thing. I could access that brain anywhere I liked, which was part of how easily I stepped through side. Having a dragon inside you all the time could give you a headache, though. I'd used to have migraines until I'd learned to partition the voices. Great dragons like my Jello wasn't just a creature, an animal, a person, but a compilation of the dragons that had come before him. Those strands of DNA carrying knowledge and experience to the new generation, essential for survival when a dragon would hatch hundreds of years after its parents had passed on. There hadn't been any great dragons for generations of Darksiders. Jello said it was a sign of a rise of a new kind of sorcerer in Darkside. He inferred that I was part of that, the stories of sorcerers who could unmake worlds and break time. If that was true, I should easily be able to defeat the subtle sorcerer who'd managed to so embed himself in my family. Then we eat them. Jello growled as he flew higher and higher until I couldn't breathe at all. I sank into the dragon, letting his strength fill me. I felt whole almost, but even lost in the dragon, my heart ached for Penny Lane.
Blooming Black, Chapter 15. Drake was in class on Monday, but he smelled like smoke and his eyes weren't entirely focused when he looked at me, like he was somewhere else. Maybe he was in shock from being under contract with me. It didn't stop him from dancing perfectly in ballet or his hands from being completely solid as he raised me above his head. After class, Madam pulled us to the side. "You two will do another performance at the final student show. I want more of Penny, less of you, Huntsman. You must be the foil to her, not the star. It will be a challenge for Mademoiselle Lane, but that is the purpose of this school, to show the students what they're capable of achieving." She nodded and turned, apparently dismissing us. I glanced at Drake, who gave me a lazy half-smile. It wasn't really lazy. No, there were any number of diabolical thoughts going on behind his mask. Looks like we'll be spending more time together. Agonizing. He stopped suddenly, frowning in earnest. Actually, I have a lot of business in Darkside right now. I'll have to ask Ian to work with you until I wrap things up. That's where you were last night. You seem out of it this morning. He smirked. I am always delirious in your presence. Yes, I'm terribly sleep-deprived. You should tuck me into bed. I swallowed and edged closer to him, awfully aware of the scent of black cherry that swirled off his skin. Are you too busy? I know it's not Tuesday, but I thought that maybe. He stared at me for a long time before he brushed his fingers across my cheek and leaned close to inhale deeply. What thoughts do you have that smell so delicious? I swallowed while his lips grazed my cheek. He was acting kind of weird, kind of wonderful, like he was drunk on me. I thought we could go on a date. Another tea party? His lips brushed my jaw that time. What? Oh, no, probably something involving trees. Trees are very nice. His lips grazed my ear. You have delicious ears. I never see them except in ballet. Your hair is glorious, but your ears, works of art. I shivered and took 2 steps away from him, gripping his arms to keep him away. Are you okay? You seem kind of drunk? He blinked, and the green in his eyes grew very bright before he laughed. Low and melodious. I am a changed mage. You need a ring. What for? He covered my hands with his and pulled me closer to him. For putting on your finger, or lighting on fire, whichever. I love your coat. I had the hardest time taking it off this morning and putting on my school uniform. I swallowed because he kept looking at me like that, hard and burning, and he smelled so delicious and dangerous. You spent all night in Darkside? Was that jealousy I felt? I couldn't go to Darkside, and it was full of things I didn't understand that got to play with my mage. He raised my hand and kissed my fingers, his lips lingering on my skin, soft and burning, the scent of ashes and smoke seeming to come from his mouth. Not all night. I went home for a little while. I'll be in Darkside as often as possible in the next few days. After things get resolved, we'll go on as many tree dates as you like. I'm very intrigued. He smiled at me, and he was a little more himself. I sighed and nodded. It was only fair for me to give him space when I'd abandoned him for a week to skin Jackson. After school, I went to the library to study with Viney. She didn't study with me. She thumped the desk where Oscar glowered, and the two of them had a rollickingly fun discussion about arbitrary mortality. I walked over to Lester. I hesitated before I sat down next to him and pulled out my conversational Portuguese. I went to work without saying anything. After about 20 minutes, he addressed me. Congratulations on your contract with Huntsman Mage. His smile and heavy-lidded eyes made the words incredibly suggestive, like the postal worker on Passiones. I leaned on my elbow and smiled at him. Thanks, Lester. Thanks so much for your willingness to work with me. I think it kind of pushed Drake in the direction of offering me his contract. He raised one heavy eyebrow. I'm glad that everything worked out. Should you be sitting with me? Do you think he'll try to kill you for talking to me? There's a clause in the contract about me working with other mages. He frowned. Any mage? I understand that you're working with Stoneborough, but why would Huntsman allow you to associate with any others? I wrinkled my nose at him. What are you talking about? Since when has Drake been jealous? He's not. Sometimes he says he is, but he doesn't care what I do with Zach. Lester studied me for a long time. Be careful. Huntsman treats Stoneborough with care because of who he is and the balance that is required between two such families in one world. Their families at war could easily turn our world into another dark side. Also, Drake considers Zachary his friend. Don't test such friendships. I nodded. Very wise, Lester. I thought you'd like me better now. Safely under contract with someone else so I didn't accidentally marry you. If you're worried about Drake going to war with you, I'll make a point to avoid you in the future. He studied me for a few seconds. I would like to be your ally. I will discuss it with Huntsman first. He will let you know whether or not he approves. He bowed to me and turned his hulking, meaty self away from me. I couldn't find Viney or Oscar. Probably they were making out in the stacks. I wasn't exactly happy about Lester asking Drake if I could study with him. That's what that whole thing was, right? Whether or not I had the right to sit at a table with another mage. Macaroons and bonbons. I was marrying Drake to save my mother, not so he could control my life more easily. Was that why I'd signed the contract? To save my mother? Or because I'd seen him across the tea table from me with Professor Cadaver eating a cookie on his hat brim, wearing a tiny top hat that Drake must have made himself? I was irritated, but I couldn't help but smile. I loved the mage. I adored him. I would probably marry him without a contract if he asked me to. If he told me that he loved me. But no. Of course he'd never say that. Even if his eyes did, his hands, his voice, every part of him whispering that he adored me as much as he loved my jacket. Excuse me, Miss Lane? I turned towards the men in suits, who were clearly not from Rosewood. I swallowed and crossed my arms, but in a moment Lester was at my side, his hulking figure glowering dangerously at the neat men. Yes? The one in charge, a man in his 40s, stepped forward, hands clasped like he was about to sing an aria. If I had magic, that's what I would make him do. He'd sing like Wit. We represent the investors who control Rosewood. It seems that you've been using these premises to create and develop products that must be monitored and controlled, for the sake of safety, of course. Lester nudged me and muttered in my ear, his breath hot. Contact Stoneborough. Now. Contact Zach? I reached for my phone, but Lester frowned. No, the bond. I dug my nails into my hip and focused on that connection. Zach. My friend who I trusted for absolutely no reason. In a moment he was there, a snarling, hissing badger of a mage between me and the men in suits. How dare you approach my intern? Do you imagine that I didn't have the legal procedures completed before allowing another into Stoneborough's confidence? Penny Lane is in my employ. You touch her! You touch her! You touch me! I blinked at him. That had all been kind of more than necessarily passionate. Also, what was that about me working for him? He was my herder assistant. His job was to keep me from blowing myself up. The man in the suit glared at Zach. I'll have to see the documents. You can talk to my contract mage. It's hers that I'm interested in. Zach cocked his head as he studied the other mage, like this was a serious standoff. Zach was so alive, intent. Totally not suicidal. He should assault men in suits more often. Her contract mage is Jasper Hopeworth. Do you really think that you'll survive that kind of crossout? Do you think Rosewood would look better with the huntsman crest or the stone burrow? The suit guy and Zack glared at each other for a long time, before finally the suit glanced away. I see that this is out of our jurisdiction for the time being. I'm glad you've become enlightened. Zack grabbed my hand and dragged me after him, away from the men. Zack, I don't think Pitch likes being dragged around, I whispered. Good. She can come and rip apart the vultures. Those guys were vultures? He gave me a contemptuous glance. You don't know anything. You honestly came to this school and chose me to marry because you like the way I looked hanging from a Christmas tree. You did look adorable as a Christmas ornament. Would you please stop dragging me? I don't think they're chasing us. Do you have any legal counsel? You mean my own contract, mage? Revere always did tourney paperwork. Does that count? He hissed. They'd be after your herders if they knew about you. What would they do with them? Confiscate, tax, sell to the highest bidder. They'll also jail you and try to torture you into replicating the tech for the greater good. Walk faster. It's a good thing that you called me. Lester told me to. Zack hissed and gripped me tighter. What were you doing with that hulking heap of detritus? Apparently bringing out your vocabulary. In the contract, I have the right to work with whoever I want. And according to the fact that I own you, you can only work with me unless for some unforeseen reason I think you need to drive another mage insane. He kept dragging me and didn't let me go until we'd reached the hideously ugly commons room. Zack was on his phone at once, arguing with someone who probably wasn't arguing back. He hung up and turned to glare at me, his eyes bright and electric. You're going to sign an employee confidentiality statement to guarantee your legal rights. How are they legal rights if I have to pretend to work for you to get them? He sneered at me. You work for me. Did you not notice the tech class? I grade you. I'm going to fail, aren't I? I shrugged. Seriously, Zack, what was that? Are you just messing with me? He raised his eyebrows. You'll get used to being copyrighted. It's better this way. Excuse me? Croissants and strawberry shortcake, you are going to die. He turned away with his phone, leaving me to sputter at his back. I left him, slamming my door. I grabbed my phone and called Revere. He answered after 14 rings. Penny. Some guys in suits came around asking about the stuff I was working on. At least, I think that's what he was saying. Members of the Government of Technical Magical Development? What? Tim. They're a branch of the council that was basically created to try and control Stoneborough. They are unequivocally failing at that. They say that the council controls the temple controls the townsel, as though we need more complications. How close are you to getting a contract? Or have you given up completely? I hesitated before I blurted out, I have a contract with Drake Huntsman. We're getting married on Valentine's. At home, meeting Mom is in the contract. Will that be a problem? He held his breath for a moment. No. He should know what he's getting involved with. Send me a copy of the contract so I can go over it. I already signed it. Until you're married, it can be dissolved. Good to know. Fine. I'll email it. I'm getting a little bit nervous about it. How so? Is the contract unfavorable? It's not that. It's that there are so many conditions that involve the two of us together. We have to live together and have a 24-hour mustache day once a year. And have Tuesday community service and Sunday afternoon tea parties. How long can that possibly last? Also, what happens when he finds out about Pitch, and that I don't have magic? Penny, I met the mage. You adore him. He owns you. This contract is the next rational step whether or not you were under a deadline. Also, Huntsman can protect you from the Temda as well as Krieg. Have there been any other attacks? Nothing. Congratulations, Penny. You attained a contract with the most eligible peer at Rosewood. I know it's been difficult for you, but your mother and I are very proud. I rolled my eyes, and Drake gets to meet her. Do you think she'll be normal? Normal? Do you think that a mage who adores you would possibly be interested in normal? Keep me updated. He hung up on me. I sighed and dropped the phone.
Blooming Black, Chapter 16. Over 500 battles that huntsman mercs were involved in. The trouble was that I'd bother to infiltrate the enemy, both sides, so I could figure out who the enemy was, which no one seemed to really know. But after hours of dragging mages hundreds of feet above the ground in Jello's claws, and I'd finally figured it out, the next night my mercs were back to fighting the wrong side again. I spent a week in Darkside, wading through the morass that was the war on the deception sorcerer who was living in my house before I went to find the devil. You haven't been fighting. The man was tall, with sharp features and a receding hairline that made him look like Count Dracula or Chocula. I have, actually. The subtle sorcerer has taken over my armies ever since the Kree attack, and he decided either revenge or irony was more to his taste in all-out war. I can break his hold on my men, but the moment I turn my attention elsewhere, they forget and once more attack the wrong side. At least I'm not personally fighting for him anymore. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the extremely elaborate table that didn't match the dingy tent we were in. You can break his hold, but can't maintain your own grasp on your men's minds. Do they lack loyalty? I scowled at him. I'd already been scowling. My head ached from spending so much time in Darkside and so little time sleeping. Also, I had a tree date waiting for me if I could just clear this mess up. I'd barely been able to get away for our Tuesday. I'm not a spellsmith, much less a spellmaster, and this sorcerer, frankly, has you running scared. So I wouldn't cast slurs in my direction. Thank you very much. He smiled, his teeth slightly pink as though he'd been drinking blood, or eating fireballs. I'm surprised you're able to break the spell at all. You're doing very well. It's true. This mage has been plotting and putting things into place for a very long time. The important thing is that my granddaughters stay out of his clutches. If she somehow gets taken by him, it will make this entire mess look like a walk in the... That's what you say, but I'd like a few more details. What, exactly, would he do with her and Pitch? The devil studied me for a long time. I don't know all the details, but she has more energy than a witch should have. Yes, her mother stole that energy, gave it to the child, and he wants it back. He will take it back and either keep her alive as a sleeping princess or kill her. Before that happens, others will kill her. Signor. The deliverer, the ruby, yes. It is extremely important that she remain out of Darkside. So many complications. If the mother took his energy, then he'll want to destroy her most. The devil shot me a sharp glance, if he can. If Serene is no longer handicapped trying to protect the child, there is very little that she cannot accomplish. Such charming women in our family. You're very lucky. Congratulations on the contract. I blinked at him. Signor had been there. Who would kill Penny if it looked like she was going to fall into the wrong hands? So Pitch was Penny's protector to keep her and the stolen energy away from the sorcerer. Does he have a name? Subtle sorcerer is too long. The devil smiled again. One of his names is Benjamin Sooth. Are you certain? He hasn't lured you over to his side. He has a number of times, but I think at the moment he is not. But I don't know. Maybe you're him. Maybe everyone is him. Maybe the world is already populated by Sooths, and here I am with a name like the Soothing Sorcerer, which isn't any shorter. I stood up. Do you have any advice for me on how to get Sooth out of my family? He raised his black eyebrows. You mean your mercenaries? He's living in Dayside, in Huntsman Manor. He stared at me, his black eyes chips of coal. You did not fight him when you got the chance? Inside our family home. Are you mad? The entire place would be completely destroyed. The ghosts of my ancestors would haunt me eternally. Also, it's in Dayside. There are laws about mage battles that I don't think Sooth would follow. He stared at me for a long time. Perhaps you're right. He has escaped from much more confining traps. So, no advice. He studied me for a long time, his monstrous mind at work beneath that facade. It was very likely that we wouldn't always be on the same side. You can individually bind your men to you, and they will share some of your immunity to the sorcerer. I nodded. That's actually useful. How strange. He raised his eyebrows so he looked particularly surprised. We are at war. These are things you should already know. Of course, if your immunity is a personal matter, who could have taught you about such things? You aren't an ordinary day-sider mage. Your blood runs very dark. Thank you. I bowed to him. I appreciate the advice. I went through side, coming out in my bedroom. Penny wasn't there. If I could share my immunity with my men, there was one I would have to start with. I called Jasper. Master Huntsman, I have an emergency. I can't take off my boots. I need you immediately. He sighed and hung up. He was almost instantaneously at my door, knocking politely. Come in. He entered, his sandy hair mussed and his exercise clothing dark from sweat. Your boots. Jasper, I have this idea about you swearing your loyalty to me. It's very feudal, ancient, but I'm feeling whimsical about it. Do you want to kneel and offer your sword, or do blood-brother business? We could exchange spit. He stared at me. I'm an employee of Huntsman Inc. We do not have a feudal system of serfs and lieges. You are the master of Huntsman Inc. Not me. I am not an actual slave. You do realize that, don't you? I stared at him. Don't be an idiot. You're the master of Huntsman Inc. Anyone who thinks differently is completely oblivious. Not even I miss that. No, this is something quite different. You see, for reasons that you currently can't understand, I'm in a position where I have immunity that I can share if you declare your fealty to me. It won't actually mean anything, but will protect you. See? He frowned at me, his sandy eyebrows like one big caterpillar crawling across his forehead. You believe I'm under the influence of diabolical magic? Your father said that you might say something like that? I stared at him. He stared back. He smiled slightly. I appreciate the offer of enslavement, but I'm actually looking forward to retirement in a few years. Fine. In that case, you're completely useless to me. You won't remember any orders I give you. Also, if you refuse the most loyal employee we have, what is the chance that any of my armies will agree to it? He studied me for a long time. Was that not a hypothetical question? Do you have anything useful to say? What influence do you think is over me? The sorcerer I'm fighting in Darkside, of course. He influences everything. He sees all, knows all, and he keeps flipping all of my orders upside down. What immunity do you have to him? I shrugged. I don't know. Something I inherited from Mother, probably. I should appreciate it more, but if I weren't aware of the problem, I could go on blissfully thinking that I'm fighting against the sorcerer instead of on his side. He frowned fiercely. Why didn't you mention this before now? I rolled my eyes and pointed at him. You see? How many times can I repeat myself? I should have realized when you signed the contract sending our armies to fight for the sorcerer without adequate payment that you were completely worthless. But it's hard for me to believe that about Jasper, the most talented Daysider mage. Even Revere called you that. He frowned. The spellmaster. Can he help you? I shrugged. I can't contact him, so I wouldn't know. Fine. If you don't want to swear fealty or whatever, help me figure out the spell work needed in case I can find some hard-up warriors who miss medieval times. He studied me for a long time before he took a seat on my couch and pulled out a notebook and pen. He sketched out a design, stars with stars and circles, interspersed with lines that left a spinning impression when he was finished. This should help focus your abilities and share them as long as the individual performs according to your will. That is, as long as you are their sworn liege. Darksider oaths are very powerful. I'd let them have their own. It will mitigate their feelings of powerlessness. I don't want them powerless, I want them protected. What good would powerless mages do me? Thank you, Jasper. Perhaps you aren't entirely worthless in spite of your inability to fight, Sooth. He winced. What did you call him? Sooth. Why? Do you know him? He gripped my shoulder. Sooth was locked away 1,000 years ago. That's nice. It seems to be time to lock him away again. And he's in Dayside, has taken personal interest in your armies. Your face is all pale. Do you need a drink? Sit down, Jasper. It's not that bad. He's just interfering with my dating life and your mind. Your hands are shaking terribly. Someone knocked on the door. Knocked was the wrong word. Pounded. It sounded like Pete excited or Zach angry. I sighed and pulled the piece of paper out of his notebook. He stared at me while I went to the door. I opened it with a scowl because I did not need my friends to take my time. Penny's eyes were dark with specks of gold in them that called to my inner dragon. "What is this?" She held up her phone, and I saw images of me lounging in a chair in a toffat while Penny rubbed lotion on my chest. "I believe they call us edible. A good deal like you. Would you like me to demonstrate, Penny Lane?" She raised her eyebrows and gazed at me sternly, but her lips twitched. "And the money? I don't think it's overpriced for a his and hers lotion." She narrowed her eyes at me, but a corner of her mouth went up. Her corners were so delightful, like her slopes and spirals. For a second there she was all geometric shapes in bright gold before she came back into focus. "Drake, there is no way that I can process over 200,000 orders on his and her lotions, even with my chem girls. What were you thinking doing a national ad campaign?" "Rhoda's done a great job, making certain that every bottle is up to the darkly sweet standard. The manufacture is going extremely smoothly. Your profit should be in the black." She grabbed my lapels and yanked me closer to her. I protested by putting my hands on her waist and holding her tight. If I wanted to have a big beauty business, I'd mess around with grandmamas. Darkly sweet is mine. But small, personal. It was a little bit okay to have my chem girls, but outsourcing production to an impersonal machine. Do you not know that there are things more important than money? I slid my hand up her back to the base of her skull. I hadn't seen her in far too long, and her anger made her cheeks pink and eyes bright. "I only allowed manufacture for the new lotions, the him and hers. It's an experiment, not only with your business, with our new partnership. It's probably time for us to have a business meeting, CEO to board members, and we can iron out these little problems." "Board members. Myself, Senior Mort, and Professor Cadaver are all senior members of the board. I believe we were going to have our board meeting in a tree. Because wood." She smiled, and for a second I forgot about anything besides the curl of her lips and the scent of vanilla. She tugged on my lapels again. "You're trying to distract me. A week you've been too busy for our tree date, and now you're offering me yourself in a tree. You say that like you want me in a tree." She cocked her head, and her eyes drifted down to my mouth. "You smell so nice. Drake, can I have you in a tree?" I swallowed. "Yes. If you promise to talk business. I love business. There's nothing more." I kissed her, her lips soft and sweet, her body melting against mine while my skin thrummed and my suit coat absorbed every sensation of her like she was against my bare chest. "Except that," I said, pulling away. I kissed her again. And again. I couldn't seem to stop, and her hair, her neck, shoulders, back, I needed every particle of her. She pulled back, dizzy and breathless. "You've missed me?" "Too much." "What tree?" "I'll bring a picnic. 15 minutes. She shook her head with a slight smile. "Bring you. An hour. I'll come and pick you up." I nodded. "An hour?" I pulled her against me because that was too long. She responded, shoving against me and scraping my lips with her teeth. Her tongue and teeth assaulted me for a wickedly short time until she pulled away and took 3 steps back, crossing her arms. 1 hour. Meet me by the tree closest to lilac stories on the green. Also, don't bring... I raised my eyebrows, but she whirled around and marched off, showing way too much self-discipline. My mouth still throbbed from her assault. When I turned around to go back to my room and take a very long bath and dress, or perhaps make a list of my most loyal soldiers who I might be able to convince to swear their loyalty, Jasper was still sitting on the couch, his expression something like shock mixed with horror and a healthy dollop of fear. Also anger. "I agree." I frowned at him. "You agree to what, Jasper? That I should definitely not neglect Penny Lane even for matters of war or business?" "I agree. I don't have a lot of time before the wedding. I need to get this cleared up. I'll become your vassal." I blinked at him. "Oh, are you sure? I might rip out your soul or something." "You wouldn't know the first thing about ripping out souls. I should explain something." "Sit down, Drake." He never called me Drake. I sat down at once. On the floor. He glared at me, and I sheepishly went to the couch. Clearly this wasn't a whimsical moment, but I had a date with Penny in an hour. In a tree, without pets. Drake, when I was young, I had a lot of ambition, but was limited as all Daysiders in the use of magic. I went to Darkside on a quest for knowledge and power. I came back with exactly what I'd sought, but I paid the price. I can relate. One never gets exactly what they expect in Darkside, does one? He shot me a glare. Darkside wasn't always as it is now, a free and fairly lawless wilderness of magic and mages. There have been ages where one or two sorcerers controlled the world. I've heard something about that. It's time for a new age of power and darkness as old lines emerge or new ones develop. You're saying that Sooth is one of those lines? He hesitated, then nodded. You see, it was a simple spell that drew on the power of the ancients. It connected me to one I chose, one who had the abilities I admire most: subtlety, wisdom, manipulation, force. So you're saying that you tied yourself to this sorcerer to gain your current powers and standing. Interesting. So you're working for him? He shook his head. No, I don't work for him, but if Sooth is around, that makes me the weakness that he can exploit to take advantage of huntsmen. In that case, you're fired. He glanced at me sharply. Only your father can fire me. I don't suppose you know where he is this time of year. He frowned at me. He's been at the house. Oh, no. I smiled blandly. Oh, yes. If you did that spell, I'm not sure if it would work, swearing fealty to me, but I'm willing to try if you are. He stood up and waved his hands until the shape he'd written spread across my floor in bright lines of green. He was adapting the magic already in my room. He could do that, so what else could he do as Sooth's puppet? Right. I'll just stand here. I stood in the center of the circle. Jasper walked around briskly like he was in a crisp suit instead of his smelly spandex. He knelt in front of me, took out a knife, drew it across his palm, and closed his eyes. The blood spilled through the air over the glowing green lines, red and green swirling together while I waited for something to happen. I needed to shave. My glamour didn't have stubble, but it was starting to grow through. I swear myself vassal to Drake Huntsman, the green mage. I break all ties and bonds with every other and promise to serve, protect, obey, and guide until death and dismemberment. I stared at the usually bland mage. His glamour crackled, and I saw for a moment a mage who wasn't nearly as demure and appropriate as I'd always thought. Ambition. Had he thought of taking over huntsmaning after I abandoned this world for Darkside? Yeah. I Drake Huntsman, the green mage of utter brilliance and magnificence, accept your offer of fealty and service and make you my underling main man. Also, I will help you with your wardrobe. He narrowed his eyes at me. I smiled mildly and shrugged. I stopped smiling when the spell went through me, a shock of energy and connection that made my bond with Penny seem slightly unobtrusive. I had Jasper in my head, in my hands. His thoughts, plans, his ideals and aspirations. He was revoltingly moral, and his long love for my Aunt Ramona wasn't something I wanted to wade through, but that he desired for power to help the powerless was why my father trusted him with huntsmen. This wasn't the first time a huntsman had been in his head, and what I found was an inspiration to mages everywhere, at least other mages. I shook my head and struggled against the grip of the spell, but it wasn't done. I had to do this thing, imbue my strength and resilience to Jasper. I put my hand on his head, gripping his skull tightly while my own fingers curved into claws that sent trails of blood down his skin to drip to his clothing. I pushed some of my own dark and hungry power at him, the paranoid, self-absorbed, guarded parts. The air crackled around us until with a snap the spell was in place and Jasper stood, weaving for a moment before he wiped the blood from his face and laughed. Okay then, I suppose you're dismissed, I said to the empty room. Empty except for Professor Cadaver.
Blooming Black, Chapter 17. When I got back to Lilac Stories, Zach was waiting for me, scowling. What? I asked as I ducked around him, heading for my room. We were going to have the best tree date in the history of Magekind. You need to sign the papers. I'm not going to promise to give you everything I make. You're worse than the vultures. Forget it. If they get too annoying, I'll just disappear. He scowled at me and followed 2 steps behind. I can't allow you into my private studio if you don't sign this. No more power tools. My mother's basement is better. No offense, Zach, but you're tech. While fun isn't worth my creative freedom. Look, you sign one of those for me, and I might consider it. Done. He pulled a paper out of thin air, and I clapped for him because I loved magic tricks way too much. I took the paper reluctantly. You're not ever allowed to breathe about or use any of the secrets you've learned in my lab. You already swore that. It's very nice, but not quite on the level of what you want from me. He ran a hand through his already disheveled brown hair. Penny, I want to work with you, but the secrets of Stoneborough can't be shared by anyone who isn't secured to the company. I want to protect you from the vultures. You need to stop being so fixated on tree dates and focus on what's important. I rolled my eyes. What's important to me is being free to do what I want when I want with who I want, except for Drake. Drake trumps everything else. Drake in a tree double trumps everything else? Do you think he'll sing? I sighed. I hope he sings badly. Also well. Do you think he can do both at the same time? Penny, signing this will also protect you from Drake. You want that, don't you? It'll make you far less vulnerable to his contract. You'll have me and all of my resources at your disposal. I know it feels like you're giving something up. But I promise. It's like joining my family. I wrinkled my nose. I don't know your family. Families are mostly terrible, aren't they? Not mine. I mean, the cat. You liked the cat, didn't you? We have a lot of cats. I stopped leafing through my clothes, looking for the perfect outfit. Why is this so important to you, Zach? You've been bothering me all week. I talked to Revere, and while he said to stay away from the suits, he made it sound like you were much scarier. Exactly. I'm scarier. So join me instead of them, okay? I turned to face him, gripping the front of his t-shirt. I'm not going to join them, ever. But signing a contract with you isn't going to happen. His eyes went all puppy dog. Soft blue that wasn't remotely real. You signed a contract with Drake. Why not me? I sighed deeply. I only signed a marriage contract with Drake to save my mother. This way she won't have any guilt to hold over me, you know. It'll be me saying that she ruined my life, not vice versa. I'm really looking forward to that conversation. I turned back to my closet. Everything was ruffled and pink, which was fine, but trees required something green, more green, like Drake's eyes. I needed suits like his. I should call Jasper and find out who made them. But you're marrying him because you love him. I love him, sure, but I'm marrying him because it's my duty. Aren't I awesome? I don't have enough green. He grabbed my shoulder and swung me around to face him. What would happen to your mother if you didn't get married? How could that possibly affect her? You don't know, do you? I shrugged off his hand. I know perfectly well. My mother cannot leave our house. It's like me riding in cars times 1,000,000. On my 18th birthday, our house goes boom if I'm not married, Grandmama insisted. He frowned at me for a long time. Too long. That makes no sense. It does if you know that my grandmama really wanted me to get married to a peer instead of some psychopath like my father. For some reason, she thought that me marrying someone like Drake would be so much better. She's dead, so I can't hold it against her. Maybe she was right. I really do. Love him. He frowned at me. Drake has too much Darksider in him. If you sign my contract, I'll be able to protect you from him in case he gets crazy. I patted his cheek. Maybe I would if you told me what's your real motivation, but you won't, so I won't. He crossed his arms and glared at me. When are you going to tell Drake about Pitch? It's going to be a surprise. He knows about your herders. You told him. I shoved him against my kiss or kill tapestry. He only looked irritated. Of course, because I wasn't channeling pitch or energy, so I'd probably just hurt myself on him. Annoying, you told him. Do you remember the night at the bar after the tourney? The one where Drake danced with Vine? I hissed at him. He smiled more broadly. Do you remember when I went into the woman's bathroom? That was Drake wearing a glamour to look like me. That's the kind of mage he is. Shameless and capable of betraying every friendship over a whim. I let him go and tapped my fingers on my lips. He's known about my herders this whole time? Yes, he said, pulling my fingers down. But I didn't tell him. I didn't tell him about pitch or the fact that you have no magic. I can be your ally, but you have to sign my contract. You still haven't said why you want to be my ally, what your motivation is. Sorry. Now get out of here before Pitch throws you out. He stared at me before he shook his head like I was too stupid and left. I glared at my closet before I pulled out my cloak. The rubber one with a lead lining. Drake had played Zack. He'd never mentioned anything, never given anything away. So he knew what I did with Zack. Would he try to take over my herder's business? I went to my trunk and started pulling out carefully packed boxes of my latest experiments. When I met Drake beneath the tree, he pulled me close, spreading his hand at the base of my spine, his warmth radiating through me. He hadn't had time for kissing me during his extremely busy week. Not that I'd wanted to. Why would I want to kiss a manipulative, controlling, irritating? I pulled his head down and kissed him, hungry for his taste, his warmth him. He held back for a second until I bit his lip. Then he grabbed me. He kissed me hard, like he was starved, while his hands tangled in my hair. Do you two have to do this in public? Viney's voice was caustic. I pulled away from Drake, straightening my skirt and trying to look innocent. Viney, what are you doing here? She scowled at me. She'd been a little bit touchy ever since the tea party, and I'd given herders to my chem girls, also refused to give her more than one. That was part of why I hadn't ever mentioned it. I didn't make herders on demand. It was an emotional thing that I could only do during particularly intense times, but not too emotional. After Poppy died, I couldn't make a herder for the life of me, not when everything just melted into goo. Lotions, yes, I could do that, even when nothing in the world mattered. Anyway, Viney scowled at me like she didn't even see Drake. Are you going to be out late? Zach's worried you'll fall out of a tree or something. She rolled her eyes. Late? I glanced at Drake, and he gave me a smile that sent a wave of heat through me. He'd kissed me like that when we hadn't even been in a tree. Late, he agreed in a low voice that made my lips tingle. Whatever. Viney spun and made her way towards Lilac Stories. When she was safely out of sight, I gestured him closer to me. He came slowly, looking me up and down to take in my kind of strange-for-me outfit. I wore a black sweater with a flippy little black skirt above my black tights with kitty faces on the knees. That matched my pink shoes with little ears, eyes, and cat nose. On my head, I had a little cat ear headband with pink ears. I really did like Zach's cat. He shook his head. Is this an animal-themed date or something? I have a dragon head I could wear if you want. I cocked my head. I actually have wolf ears and this super cute wolf scarf if you don't mind. He raised an eyebrow. Wolf ears? I'd rather not. I gave him my big eyes and poked his stomach. But it's our first date as an engaged couple, isn't it? He stiffened and scratched his head. And those should be animal-themed? I sighed dramatically. Oh, I see. How awkward. I guess I could take off the cat ears. I reached up, but he stopped me. His fingers around mine, warmth and a low electrical current flowing through us. He cleared his throat and stared at my lips before he smiled and looked into my eyes with his soft green ones. I'd love to wear wolf ears and a wolf scarf. I beamed at him and pulled his head down for a quick kiss of my unsmudgeable pink lipstick. It was extremely hard to pull away from his soft lips, but somehow I managed. I put on the wolf ear headband and wrapped the scarf carefully around his neck. We're having a slight detour tonight. The trees will come later. First, we're going down to the bottom fields to throw herders. I tugged on his hand. He followed but seemed reluctant. Why would we do that? I glanced at him over my shoulder. You're such a bold mage, going where no mage has gone before. I'm talking about a woman's bathroom. Why didn't you mention anything about my herders? You must be chomping at the bit to take over my business. It's not a business. It's a charity, and an illegal one at that. No, I don't take over that kind of thing. You really should charge more, though. The things you're peddling are war grade. You do realize that, don't you? Huntsman Inc. would love to order from you. He adapted to this new information so easily. I stopped walking and let go of his hand. Drake, how much did it cost to run the marketing for the new lotions? He frowned at me. You did say that you were going to talk business. 4 million? Not much. I gasped and choked and gasped again. What do you mean? 4 million lollipops. That's right, Penny Lane. You can pay me back in lollipops. He grabbed my hand and pulled me closer to him, his fingers grazing my cheek as he gazed into my eyes. I belong to you. You'll own half of Huntsman when you marry me. 4 million is not a big number. And I owned you, but you still stole Darkly Sweet from me. I'm going to pay you back in herders. You don't like how little I charge. Fine. A lead box full of herders for 4 million. But you are never going to run an ad campaign for me again. Drake. I've been working so hard to make any profit at all. You come in and make all of my efforts look like nothing compared to dumping money on it. It's depressing. Some people care about more than money, Drake. Some people care about individuality and one-on-one relationships. And some people care about the bottom line. Some people care about putting the most people to work. Some people see growth as more opportunity to make differences to others on a larger scale. I don't think it matters, the size you're working on, but whether or not your intent is to harm or to help. And your intent? He smiled and squeezed my hand. We hire people with consciences who worry about where the company is going. How about you? How about you? How is your conscience? Maybe I'll have to make you a CEO of something. I nudged him. I'm afraid that I'll let any red-haired mage who smells like black cherry get away with anything. He tucked my arm in his. Then we haven't any problems. When we got to the field, I laid out the blanket, pulling it out of the huge picnic basket. After Drake helped me straighten it, I knelt down and pulled out a lead box. I really love those boxes, Drake said in a low voice, his eyes twinkling. I opened it up, showing him clusters of small herders. They're arranged by distance from point of impact. He stared at them. They're all pink. No, this one is green. I pointed to the one about the size of a walnut. He raised an eyebrow. I beg your pardon. Most of them are pink. I thought they would be green to match me or blue to match Zach. He's your assistant, right? I know it sounds selfish, but my herders are more about me than about mages, no matter how charmingly psychotic. Why don't we do 3, 1 in each range, just to show you you're getting your money's worth? I pointed at the group closest to the edge of the box. 50 meters. I pointed to the next group. 25, and these are 5. I like to use multiples of 5. These are averages. Some might be a little more powerful, and I was a little bit creative with some of these ones. This one, for instance, I said, pointing to a small one the size of my thumbnail that was in the 50-meter pile. I'm kind of excited to see how it goes. He cleared his throat. Experimental? I shrugged. I'm paying you back for the money you used on my promotions and herders, but you didn't give me specs, so I felt free to use my imagination. I hope that isn't a problem, Drakey Walkie Walkie. He gave me a flat look. You own me. You don't owe me herders, but if you want to give me them, it would be rude to refuse. Let's take that one, the green one, and the swirly big one. I handed the first one over, and he sat there on my blanket in the dark, wearing black wolf ears. I wish you had on eyeliner. He sighed. Me too. Unfortunately, I'm fresh out. Is that what you want? I suppose I could find some. I leaned up and brushed his cheek with my lips. No, but you'd look a teeny bit more like a music video star. A big bad wolf in the woods. They always wear eyeliner. I'm clearly not that kind of wolf. His voice was a low growl that sent shivers up my spine. So this is our first engaged date. Does that mean if we went to a restaurant, we wouldn't have to eat in separate booths? About doing the marketing stuff for Darkly Sweet, him and hers. I suppose your intentions were good. He nudged me. My intentions are never good. Not everything I throw money at does as well. Have you seen your numbers? The factory is backed up with orders. Your business was going to take off with orders. Your business was going to take off with or without my help. The market is ready for you. Do you think I'll make 500,000? I could buy a suitable house and scads of desolate wasteland for that price to stick my mother in. He cleared his throat. At least. What are you going to do with that much money? Let me guess. A monkey zoo? No. A weasel habitat. I shook my head. A 3-ring circus. It's always been a dream of yours to be a ringleader. You, Viney, and Zach are already a 3-ring circus. That's probably true. And we already have 2 shows every week. I'm sorry about Tuesday. I really hated hurrying you up, getting Chinese to go, but I made a face. I guess it's your turn. It's not like you missed Tuesday entirely. Missy seemed kind of weird. I'm worried about her. He frowned at me. I shouldn't have done that. I should never have told her about Narcolo. I was too concerned with your safety, but you're much more capable of taking care of yourself than she is, particularly emotionally. I'll be glad to have this business mess over. I particularly missed licking the soy sauce. Off your mouth after dinner. He squeezed my fingers, his eyes soft, voice low. I cleared my throat. I should have brought a bottle of soy sauce. Shall we lob first or eat first? He rolled the herder in his fingers, then put it back and rummaged around in the picnic basket. I think eating. Do you want to go to a movie sometime? What kind of movies do you like? He was quiet for a few minutes. I don't really like movies. I laughed. That's right, you don't like anything. So why would you want to go to one with me? He pulled my arm closer to him, pinning it against his ribs. I like you. I like sitting in dark theaters with you. I don't really pay attention to movies, but it can be a good place to think. Why don't you like movies? It's not real. I take it that you really don't like telenovelas. I love watching you watch telenovelas. I think you actually think that they're not actors, but people in some alternate universe you'll probably visit on vacation to meet your evil twin separated by birth. My evil twin with pitch black hair entwined with rodent skulls. I smiled at him brightly and pulled away from him to unwrap a lollipop. Is it dirt or tiramisu? Black cherry. Why'd guys smell like that? He cleared his throat. Like what? Like you smell like black cherry and Zach smells like cookies and fresh bread and Ian smells like... He cut me off. Why are you smelling, Ian? I cocked my head at him and sucked on the lollipop. How can I not smell people? Although I didn't really smell Zach until the dance. I smelled you the first time I fell over on top of you. Is there some hidden meaning behind it? Like magic or something? Does Zach smell like bread? Because his character is more solid and wholesome while you are dark cherry because you're too potent and intense to be taken in large doses? And maybe Ian smells like citrus and sandalwood because he's so golden and sensual? He grunted. You shouldn't smell Ian. Are you jealous? Am I only supposed to like the way you smell? You smell desire. You smell a man's desire for you. I wanted you the first moment you knocked me down. I've wanted you every moment since. Black cherry has more to do with you than me, how you feel about me. But that Ian and Zach smell nice to you, that Ian and Zach smell nice to you, that they smell it all. I gripped his arm. Are you serious? Are you talking about pheromones? So what about when you desire other people? What do you smell like to them? What about Viney? I'll have to ask her. This is so interesting. And Wit. It's fascinating. I might have to kill Wit. I really think that you should never desire another person as long as you live. Can I smell your desire for other people? Is it like stinky socks or something? He laughed. I wouldn't admit that you can smell my desire. It's a very, very strange talent to have. It's very dark-sider of you. Other witches would be jealous. While I'm with you, the odds of me noticing anyone else are pretty slim. I sucked on my dark cherry lollipop for a minute before I took it out and frowned at the dark purple thing. Dark cherry was one of my favorite herder scents. I used to make them for Pitch all the time. So edgy and dangerous, so moody and mysterious, sweet with that bite of tart that makes the sweet all the sweeter in contrast. Revere smells like paper. Stacks of dusty paper. Stacks of dusty paper. Signor Ludi smells a bit like motor oil and fuzzy dice. I suppose that means he really doesn't want to run away with me. He growled. You sound disappointed. I shrugged. I told you that I had a crush on him. So Zach did like me for a few minutes. I thought so. He exhaled. You should be very proud. Zach is very selective about women. And you aren't? Never mind. He laughed and pulled me into his arms, tilting his head so the moonlight fell across his face. Do you want me to crave you, to ache for your touch, your smile? Do you want me to see you and want you more than a man can bear without losing his sanity? I licked my lips. I would kind of like your phoenix of desire to burn for me. He groaned like I'd hurt him. The phoenix of what? He let me go and shook his head. What's wrong with the phoenix of desire? Isn't that poetic? You got it from a telenovela. I watched that one. Is that so bad? You know who likes telenovelas? Teddy the Blackheart Prince. What does Teddy smell like? Smoky black licorice. Do you like black licorice? I chewed on my lip. A little bit. It's kind of overwhelming. You can't put anise in anything, or it overwhelms everything else. You like black cherry better than black licorice? I pretended to think about it for a long time while he sat silently, ominously beside me. Black cherry is one of my favorite things. I like it much better than black licorice. Funny that you're both black. Something about the state of your souls. My soul is green. Like gangrene. He snorted. Like gangrene, he bumped me and the scent of black cherry swirled around me.
Blooming Black, Chapter 18. The barren field was possibly the ugliest place at Rosewood to have a picnic. The fields were indeed barren except for the targets set up here and there, scarecrows, stuffed dragons, that kind of thing. There wasn't any snow, just frozen mud that soaked through the blanket to my pants. We were situated at the end of the field beside trees that looked a bit singed. I should have worn field clothes, leather pants, thick boots that came up to mid-calf, leather jacket, and thick black shirt beneath. Instead, everything I had on was bedazzled. Except the coat. I loved that coat so much. A pop and a thump brought my attention to the far end of the field, where a maroon shock wave went out about 30 feet from impact point. "Ooh, that's so pretty. It's like pink, only edgy," Penny cooed. I grinned and handed her a paper plate filled with half a chicken, bread products, and some exciting veggies like carrot and celery sticks. I should have packed picnic. Penny scooted against me and gazed at me, looking ridiculous and adorable. She really needed some whiskers to go with her ears. She made Black look cute. "Drake, can I lean against you?" I pulled her over into the curve of my body, my hand over her stomach. I suddenly felt ravenous for something other than chicken. Another herder went off down the field, this one blue and silver. "Ooh, sparkles." Metal shrapnel. Like I said. I nibbled on her ear. I hadn't tasted her ears nearly enough, or her neck or shoulder. "I've missed you." She sighed. "Zach is trying to get me to sign his work contract. Ever since the suits talked to me, he's been incredibly stubborn about it." I pulled back far enough I could see her eyes. "What suits?" Revere called them the TMD. I inhaled and for a moment felt very cold. "Members from the technical magical development came to see you." "What did you say?" "Nothing. Zach threatened them with lawsuits and dragged me away. It was very exciting if you like that kind of thing. Is it serious?" I looked around, searching the shadows. Huntsmen didn't usually have to deal with them, but Stoneborough did. Zach would know exactly the kind of threat they posed. I needed to talk to him. "How long has it been? A week? Have you seen anything from them since?" She shrugged. "Not a thing. Zach told them that Jasper was my contract mage. You probably don't mind. You're always saying that I should make use of you." "Jasper, controlled by Sooth. Not a good idea. You should find an independent mage who isn't above assassination. Teddy would be excellent." She stared at me. "You're joking." "I'm not. He's brilliant. He has the most curious mind of anyone I've met, including you. He's diabolical. That's exactly the kind of mage you want for your council. He's extremely well-versed in contracts. His dad wanted him to be that kind of mage." "Huh." She stared at me, head cocked adorably. I had no idea that assassination went with contract. "I'll call him." I pulled out my phone, but Penny stole it out of my fingers. "Later, Drake. Right now, I don't want to think about anything other than you." I growled and ran my nose over the side of her neck, settling her back against me. "You know exactly how to manipulate my ego. You'll be doing that a lot." She smelled so edible, and I'd growled. Possibly steam was coming out of my nostrils. I pulled away and arranged Penny so that her head was on my outstretched legs. She stared up at me before she fingered my wolf ears. Adorable yet terrifying. "You look far more sultry than silly. This is like the first time we met. I really liked your pants. I should have known I was in trouble immediately." I cleared my throat and slid my thumb over her bottom lip until it parted. "I did. You were trouble from the first moment you broke through my shield like it didn't exist. Your hair looked very good on me." "Really? Do you want me to chop it off so you can wrap it around you like a cloak?" Her hair. I slid my fingers through it, silky and tangled, exactly how I liked it. All it needed were some leaves and dirt from rolling around in the woods. I inhaled deeply and shifted away from her. "I think about that sometimes, but I think that you'd miss your hair. Where would you put your weasel when you're getting into mischief together?" She tugged on my wolf scarf. "How did you get so sweet?" "Is that sweet? How odd. You must bring it out in me. You've tamed we with your magic lollipops and ridiculously long legs. And neck. I'm just like a ballerina without the grace." I slid my thumb over her silky cheek. "I should punish you for saying such things. We have a performance to prepare for. Has Ian been helping you?" She shook her head. "No, I haven't really seen him. Do you want me to ask him to train me again?" "No. It's probably a good idea. How do you like owning him?" "It's fine. He doesn't bother me or my chem girls. I wonder if he's found someone else for me to give the bond to." I gave her a wry smile. I needed to check on what mischief On had been getting into. Teddy also, and probably Zach. Later, are we going to blow something up or not? Otherwise, I'm going to kiss you for a very long time. She sat up and examined the herders. Which one do you want to start with? I stood and straightened my glorious jacket. Let's do the swirly one. Do you want me to throw it while you watch from a safe distance, or would you rather do the honors? I grinned at her as I thought of Signor frying my face off with one of my witch's herders. I would love to get some practice throwing your herders. She shrugged. If you insist, make sure that you roll the ball for a few seconds in your hands, maybe blow on it to warm it up. These are all impact herders. I don't deal with timers. You don't like timers? Combining tech with combustibles can take the fun out of it. I can do timers and delay reactors and multiple tails, but it's not very fun. These are for fun. Ah, I'm prepared for fun. She beamed and handed me the swirling herder. I rolled it in my palms while she backed away. That's a 25-meter one. You'll have to throw it hard, and maybe you should put up a nice shield around your cute legs. You think my legs are cute? I raised an eyebrow seductively. She shook her head. If you don't throw that soon, it's going to start leaking. That's a bad thing. I turned and ran towards the target, giving Penny about 10 meters before I lobbed it. Okay, it was kind of a gutless throw, to be perfectly honest, but I was a mage and I was trying to be gentle. Penny clapped and whistled until I turned and looked at her. I almost missed the show. I turned back just in time for impact, an immediate 5-foot explosion of pink smoke in the shape of a heart. She'd made me a heart. I stared at the glittery pink aftermath for a long time until the scent carried to me on the wind. Black cherry. I turned around, arms crossed, so that I wouldn't accidentally take Penny and never let her go. A smoke heart. I didn't know that was even possible. She curved her hands into a heart and put it over chest. I call them experiments in love. Nice, right? I shook my head for a moment, speechless. So nice. 4 million for smoke hearts. Wow. I think you undercharged me. That's when the next explosion spiraled out of the swarly herder, green smoke that shot up like jagged fangs with pointed ears, pink streaks swirling around it. Penny howled while I stood there staring at her version of my magic green wolf. It wasn't possible for a witch to make chemical herders like that. How utterly delightful. Drake, you're going to get sparkled. I didn't move. I couldn't help but want to get even closer when the next round went off, like she'd said, sparkles. The silver sparks went up like a fountain, shooting high and then sideways into bursts puffing pink smoke and smelling like vanilla and black cherry. I inhaled deeply, standing there, staring at the fountain, and then the sudden lightning shot. Penny Drake so bright it left an afterimage on my retinas. Penny whooped and hollered behind me while I laughed and blinked, unable to see for a minute that I enjoyed. The image of Penny and Drake still bright and glorious. Experiments in love. What? Drake, the next part is the herder bit of it. Drake, you're still in range. Are you an idiot? Put up a shield or something. A shield, as though I didn't want to feel every shred of metal. I spread my arms as the cascade of silver and pink smoke clouds engulfed me. Penny started counting. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and pow. Green swirled out with the pink and silver slashed through while the lightning flickered in shapes inside the core of hearts twining and twisting. Then a green shock wave spread out from the center, sweeping past me in a whoosh. The next shock wave was pink and the next was silver heart confetti. Metallic, burning heart confetti, also known as shrapnel. It was within 5 feet of Penny's projected radius. Incredible. The height was way off. It shot up at least 100 feet. She must love me that much. I spread my arms and got swept away with the final blast in hard shrapnel. It was incredibly beautiful. It would probably blind me for a few minutes. I was laying in the field in the middle of the swirling madness that was Penny's heart when she stumbled onto me, blocking out the last final sweeping and pounding volley. It would have been so pretty to see the rolling waves of green smoke mixed with pink, but having Penny on top of me, even with a lead cloak over us, made up for any missed beauty. I inhaled deeply, her hair, her skin, the sweetest, most beautiful creature in any world. Finally, it was quiet. She waited to the count of 50 before she rolled off me, the scent of vanilla, black cherry, smoke, and blood heavy in the air. A fine green mist hung in the air, and Penny's face, when I finally saw it, had a film of pink over it. She beamed at me and wiped her fingers over my face. Something hurt in my cheek. I touched it. A heart had embedded right beneath my left eye. "That is so cute." Penny poked it with her fingers while I stared at her, the exquisite, brilliant, creative witch who belonged to me. Mine. My treasure. "Drake, why didn't you make a shield or at least move out of range? You could have gone blind." I stayed there, quiet, still, holding back the dragon who would carry her away and never ever let her go. Penny leaned over me, concerned. "Are you okay? There wasn't anything that should affect your nervous system in this one. Maybe you inhaled too much smoke. Do you need mouth-to-mouth resuscitation? I have no idea how to do that, but I can find someone." She looked around and noticed the shadows gathered around the edges of our field, staying way back, but definitely an audience. I rose in a rush, sweeping her off her feet while my cheek heart no doubt glittered. Maybe I could keep it like that forever. "Why are you carrying me?" She bounced against me as I headed back to where we'd left the picnic and the other herders. The suits would definitely want their hands on those. And her. I want to see what the other ones do. I'm desperate to know. So desperate. She sighed and leaned her head against my shoulder, enjoying the bumpy ride. "So you're not mad about the hearts, particularly the one embedded in your face?" I laughed and kissed her, her nose and lips, her chin and throat before I straightened and stared at her. The delight of my eyes, the only reason they had to see. "You really are Pitch's supplier. You're really that good. The precision of each wave was incredible. Our names in sulfur and carbon. Brilliant. I still see it when I close my eyes." I kissed her forehead and then put her down because we were back at the pic. I knelt in front of the box, staring at the two remaining herders. Which one should I do next? She shrugged and nibbled on a drumstick. "The small one is shorter but more powerful. The big one is kind of interesting." She took a big bite of chicken and then stuffed a roll in her mouth. Then, after swallowing too fast, drank from the bottle she opened with her teeth. "Penny, you wrote our names in the sky in lightning. You threw it very nicely. A little bit weak and off-target, but for a mage, not entirely terrible." I laughed and grabbed her hand, greasy from chicken, and pressed a kiss against her delicious knuckles. "Did you really make it smell like black cherry?" "And vanilla. I'm kind of vanilla, don't you think? Not just blood. I'm too cute to be just blood. And ash." She wrinkled her nose. "Well, herders always smell a little bit like ash. Don't stand in range again. Maybe you think it's Mako, but you just look stupid." I grinned at her. It was worth it. I did shield my eyes. This is by far the best date I've ever had. We should have gotten engaged sooner. She frowned around her chicken drumstick. "How many dates have you had?" "Never mind, except that I want to know. Are we dating other people or just each other?" I forced a laugh as I rubbed my hands on my knees instead of hers. "I've been exclusively dating you ever since our tea party. But since you had your other red-headed boyfriend with you, it's a double standard. It's a good thing I'm so open-minded." I wanted to stand in the middle of an explosion wrapped around Penny for the rest of my life. My heart ached with wanting. "All right, I'll take the big one, and we'll save the small one for last. That's a 5-meter one, but you might want to give it a little more space than that." I grinned. "Really? Special effects?" She nodded and grabbed another piece of chicken. I pressed a kiss to her head before I picked up the large pink herder and turned back to the large, dark field. The target, the straw man, was dispersed over the field like mulch from the first herder, ridiculously satisfying. "Stay out of range, Mako man." I nodded at her before I walked off, fixing my slightly askew wolf ears.
Blooming Black, Chapter 19. I sat on the blanket watching Drake walk jauntily away from me, rolling the tennis ball-sized herder in his incredibly complicated hands. He didn't mind getting exploded. Not even a little bit. The back of his pants read, "Just shaking it." I bit my lip because he was the most adorable mage in the world with his silver heart-embedded cheek and bedazzled behind. And the wolf ears. It was a little bit funny that he'd hesitated about them, but had embraced the bedazzlement. I was so utterly delighted with my mage, I didn't notice the attack until it was right on top of me. I dove forward, pulling the cloak over me while I landed on the lead box. I fished out the tiny herder while iron hands gripped my arms, wrapping me up inside of the layers of cloaks, so that I couldn't fight or get away. The sound of wolves howling filled the air, howls that sent shivers up my spine. That was from my herder. It had turned out really well. Sound was extremely hard to do much with, but those howls were incredible. I tucked into a ball while they carried me into the woods. I'd counted 7 hands grabbing me, so at least 4 people, unless some had extra arms. Maybe that was a team thing, but how would they make jackets for that? Either way, I would wait until we were in the woods deep enough that no one would see me before pitch, and I got a precise count. I took deep, even breaths, my body heavy and relaxed until it was time. I slipped my hand out between the 2 cloaks and found the first wrist. I snapped it. I felt kind of sick at the sound of bones and tendons cracking. But I didn't have time for regret. I would pay for that later. I channeled pitch, stretching into smoke and ash as I slipped out of the cloak, leaving it in their hands. The men wore hoods and ninja scarves, but they were the same men who had tried to talk to me until I'd called Zach. The suits. The temmed. I smiled as I slipped between them, knocking one onto his face after I sort of blew out a knee with one perfectly aimed heel, and then I twisted around, wrapping my legs around one's throat while I gripped another's throat with my hand. When they fell together on top of me, I released the herder between their bodies, aiming at a tree 15 feet away. I wriggled beneath the first fallen guy who was moaning, the 2 guys trying to pull me out from under him when the herder exploded. I felt the weight of the 2 guys on top of me as soon as the first shockwave hit them. I lay there beneath their bodies while wave after wave ripped through them and into me. I pressed into the icy earth beneath 3 team mages. "Penny! Penny!" It sounded like Zach. He pulled the bodies off of me. They were all unconscious, including the 4th guy with the badly broken wrist. I smiled at Zach, patting his cheek. "Did you see it? Was it cool?" He rolled his eyes and pulled me into a hug. For a second I stiffened up, because we were still mostly at war, but he was worried and needed to know that I was okay. I hugged him back, kind of delicately. Drake grabbed my shoulder, jerking me away from Zach. I smiled into Drake's furiously worried scowl. "Did you like the howling herder?" He ran his hands roughly over my whole body. Well, most of it before he turned to the men around the clearing. When one of them started stirring, Drake kicked him so hard I heard ribs crack. I flinched and stepped away from Drake. It was like Zach and the Christmas tree. "Hey, Drake, I don't really want to watch you beat up unconscious people at the end of our date. Can we not?" I wrapped my arms around my body and started shaking. I gasped as my wrist shattered and then fell down when my knee went out. Zach picked me up, swinging me up in his arms. "Drake, I'm taking her in. I'll be back." Zach ran so fast, the world passed in a blur. He must have super boots or something. In practically no time at all, he threw me onto my bed, which hurt my knee and wrist and a few other places before he was slamming my door, leaving me there. I needed to be healed. Drake would probably notice that every injury I had was exactly similar to the ones I'd given the ninja suits. I picked up my phone and called Ian. He answered it almost immediately. "What can I do for you?" "Hi, are you available for healing?" "I am. Are you in Lilac Stories?" "Yep." "I'll see you soon." I let my phone fall out of my fingers. The mage certainly didn't waste time with chit-chat. I barely had a chance to go over my injuries when a soft knock sounded on my door. I'd have to open it for him. There were some perks to having a Zach mage next door. I hopped to the door and let in Ian. He smiled all golden as he stepped past me into my room. He smelled like his rosemary shampoo. I closed the door reluctantly and hopped back to my bed. Hi. Thanks for coming so fast. I hope you don't mind. I just thought it would be good if I were all healed before Drake gets back. He raised his eyebrows. What's he up to? I blinked at him, beating up unconscious suits from Teamed. Zach went to help, or maybe hurt. I don't know. Start with my wrist. It has several fractures, so be gentle. He nodded and took my forearm with one hand, running his golden fingers over my wrist with the other. The scent of citrus and sandalwood, golden and musky, made me turn my head away from him. I'm sorry. Does that hurt? It's fine. Just hurry. He continued probing until a warm glow like sunshine spread through my joint. It was the most pleasant healing I'd ever had. Wow, he was very good. Too good. And I did not hate the way he smelled. What did that say about me? I did not like Ian, even if I did like the way he smelled. Drake was probably messing with me. It wasn't a mage's desire I smelled. That was too weird. Anything else? I hesitated, but he'd seen me hopping. My knee. Do you need my skin? Or can you heal me through my tights? He raised his golden eyebrows. Through your tights would be sufficient, unless you want skin-to-skin contact. No, I don't. I just wondered. Okay. I closed my eyes and gripped the edge of my bed while he chuckled and carefully held my knee between his hands. Relax. This shouldn't hurt. Suit ninjas. Also herders. Are you finished? Patience, Penny Lane. I don't suppose you'd hold my forearm while I do this? It would be convenient to get all the personal contact out of the way at the same time. That was a great idea. I gripped his forearm and let his pain flood me. He wanted to get rid of it. That wasn't normal. Usually, mages cling to their pain if they'd been steeped in it for very long. Ian did not. I fell back on my bed, dizzy with the pain. I'd meant to relieve the bond, not pull so much out of him. Anything else? He asked, eyes bright gold and the scent of smoke mingling with sandalwood. Bruising, cracked ribs. That kind of thing. I'm just going to close my eyes for a second. I wasn't going to fall asleep with Ian, except I did. I woke up in my bed, starving. So was Signor Mort. He was gnawing on my collarbone. He hadn't quite drawn blood. But there would be some chafing. I put him in his cage with a nice little snack and got dressed for class. I walked through the halls and it was weird. No one tried to trip me or pull my hair. Where Viney had a 2-foot radius, mine was 3. I stopped walking, closed my eyes, and counted to 15. I opened my eyes, but it didn't work. I was still going to kill everyone. Had she told everyone about the kind of herders I could make? I went to my world's history class, sliding into my seat by the wall without looking around at all the hungry stares. I did not need to deal with this, except that apparently I did. Wit sat down in the desk next to me, her entourage keeping their distance while she studied me like the hungry predator she was. I unwrapped a lollipop with shaky fingers. Everyone is talking about the herders you and Drake set off last night. Was that last night? It seems so long ago. She laughed. A brittle, annoying sound. Where did you get them? I widened my eyes innocently. Zach. He's friends with Pitch's supplier. Speaking of Pitch, your face looks nice. She tossed her long, luxurious black curls over her shoulder while her peacock blue eyes narrowed at me. My face isn't the only thing about me that looks nice. Are you and Drake finally a real couple? I tried to look thoughtful. We're getting married on Valentine's Day, so I think that's a yes. She put her hands on either side of my desk and screamed at me, her face turning this horrible shade of persimmon. It totally clashed with her eyes. I winced slightly as she screamed, on and on and on and on, until Professor Vale came up and clapped her hand on Whit's shoulder. Whit stood upright, blinking and breathing rapidly. She headed out of class while everyone held very still. I shrugged and pulled out my book. "What did you say to Whit?" I looked up at her brunette-haired friend. I sucked on my lollipop before I shrugged. I just announced my upcoming marriage with Drake. I didn't think she'd get so excited. She scowled at me before she spun around and walked off, skirt swishing impressively. "Iced!" I glanced behind me where a girl with glasses was leaning over her desk, the expression on her face frantic. I leaned over the back of my chair, expecting gum in my face or something, but she only passed me a slip of paper that I took with a bright smile. Drake swore he would never marry. Okay. I slid the note into my book and focused ahead on the instructor. During chemistry, everyone was staring at me when I came into class, and they just kept staring until the professor came in and stopped beside my desk. "Penny Lane, congratulations. You're the first Rosewood student to completely level the throwing grounds. We could go lawn bowling there in the summer." I stared at my chemistry teacher, Professor Pewter, who had apparently finally gone completely insane. "That's nice. It sounds like really good exercise. Do you have a contract with Stoneborough?" I hesitated. "We're still working on negotiations." He narrowed his eyes at me. "If you are hesitant, there are several other corporations that would be delighted to have you." He turned to the front of the class to talk about chemical reactions. I leaned over to hiss at Rhoda. "What was that about?" She stared at me. "Are you kidding?" I glanced around to check, then shrugged. "I don't think so." "Would it be funny?" Her mouth tightened, and I remembered that she was the one who had drawn a mustache on Pitch's poster. Not that I didn't love mustaches, but still. Those herders were like nothing anyone's ever seen. It was like you took Pitch's herders and mixed them up with the most advanced mage tech. "Oh, I was working with Pitch's herder maker and Zach. I can't claim credit for them." She gave me a flat look. "Pink hearts, wolf howls, and heart confetti. You can't take credit for that. There isn't another witch in the world who would create something like that." I blinked at her. That was probably true. I gave her a sickly smile. "I designed them." She turned and pulled out her chemistry book, clearly upset with me, but I couldn't understand why. Was it immoral to make herders whimsical? My mother thought so, but I'd thought that Rhoda kind of was with me in the whimsy department. Apparently not. In my ballet class, I was warming up at the bar when Drake came in, my pas de deux partner. He grabbed me, picked me up, and started spinning me around. His fingers were kind of in my armpits. I squealed and tried not to kick anyone in the face. Finally, he slid me down his body, pulling me against him, while his dark eyes gleamed green, his red hair falling over his forehead like lava. "Drake, you are so beautiful, like a disaster come alive." He grinned. No one has ever described my attributes so aptly. I can still see our names in lightning when I close my eyes. "Come on," before Madame berates us most cruelly. He laughed and picked me up, spinning me around and tickling me again while I giggled and convulsed. Finally, Madame spoke to him firmly, but he kept grinning at me during class. He was so adorable. I couldn't help but gaze at him as often as I possibly could, drinking him in with my eyes. At the end of class, I dragged him out into the hall in my pale pink leotard to kiss him. He broke away, cupped my cheek, and studied my face, eyes seeming to linger on my lips. "Last night's tree date was incredible. Your herders are as lovely as you. I adore them. I adore them. I wish I could be blown up by herders every night for the rest of my life. I'm so very selfish. I'm sorry that I lost my temper with the men who tried to kidnap you. I pressed my lips together, still feeling his lips against mine. It's fine. They were really annoying. He kissed my fingers one more time before he left, glancing back at me a dozen times before I sighed and headed into the girls' locker room. The witch, with the beautiful arabesque, was in there changing into her leotard. She must have ballet after me this quarter. "Hello." "How are you?" I asked, way too happy. I couldn't help it. Drake was happy. I was happy. The whole world was happy. You're the only person anyone ever talks about anymore. You're marrying Drake. You're the most amazing herder maker in the world. You're best friends with Pitch Black. Your lotions are the only things to get for Valentine's Day. She rolled her eyes and started working on her hair. Her straight locks went into a bun, so perfectly. Okay, that does sound boring. I'm sorry. She shot me a flat look, then sighed. It's fine. The trouble with most of the witches in this school is that they are way too busy worrying about whether they're better than other people instead of focusing on their own goals and growth. I personally have had a very productive year. That's what education is about, becoming better than your own expectations, pushing yourself to the next level. I nodded. Excellence. I can tell. You're going to be a real change maker in the world. My thing is actually survival. I've been really surprised at how much fun it's been here. She frowned at me. What kind of survival? I cocked my head at her. Ballet. Also mages. Mostly mages. She rolled her eyes, but smiled slightly. Too many mages are hard to juggle. I've always been a moderate to very talented juggler.
Blooming Black, Chapter 20. After I stopped beating the suit mages who dared touch my witch, I'd had a conference with Zack and Ian in the hideous common room outside Penny's room where she lay sleeping in her cat outfit. She called you to heal her, I asked Ian. He nodded. It's apparently what she likes to do with me. And you, I said, turning to Zack, how did you know that she needed you? 100-foot-high pink heart sort of draws the eye. Why didn't you tell me about the Temd? He shrugged and kind of glowered at me. Not your problem. She works with me. I smiled at him. I see. It's not my problem if my date is disturbed by men that you could have warned me about. Zack rolled his eyes. Even if Penny hadn't blown them up, they wouldn't have gone far. Anyway, I heard that it was Huntsman who tipped off the town about Penny. I stared at him. Soothe, he wanted her. What a perfectly brilliant plan to use the Dayside Council against its members. I rubbed my forehead. I suddenly felt all those explosions in my bones. You look tired, Drake. You need to rest. Ian put a hand on my shoulder, his golden warmth an offering that I pushed away. I'm fine. It's just this ancient evil that wants to play with me. No problem. It's fun, except not as fun as Penny Lane. I'm really disappointed that I didn't get to finish our date. We were going to climb trees. Zack rolled his eyes. Yeah, she's been obsessing about you in a tree for a week. You'll have to make it up to her, but not tonight. Get rest. You need to clear your head, figure out a plan, and do all that stuff you do. I glanced at Penny's door, but Ian laughed. She's sleeping with her weasel. He nipped me very nicely. He said that like it would discourage me to have Signor Mort nibble me to death. Fine. I nodded to Ian. Walk with me. I headed down the arched hall toward my room. How bad were her injuries? Not too bad. She disliked me touching her. I glanced at him. She doesn't dislike you nearly enough. He smiled mildly. Is it possible for her to dislike me enough to suit you? Even her dislike, if intense, would inspire your jealousy. How do you do it? Jealousy comes easily. He laughed, low and golden. How do you allow Zack to be so close to her? You must be able to see his emotions. I frowned at him. How to explain something I barely understood myself? Zach loves Pitch. He'll always love her. Right now, he's feeling frustrated, and maybe he's taking out his emotions on Penny, her chem girls, but Zach isn't going to change his mind or his heart about Pitch. He is steadfast. That's why I trust him with Penny. Also, she loves me. Interesting. Some mages can feel things for more than one witch. You? Me. It's hard enough to care for one witch, much less two. But Penny is special. You don't think he's ever thought of her that way? Tenny said he smelled like bread and cookies. That probably meant that he had desired her at some point, but she'd been wearing black lipstick at the ball. Zach had been thinking of Pitch, not Penny. No, Zach wouldn't ever betray me or Pitch. What about you? Will you betray me? He sighed. I'd like to say no, but you know my weakness. Make certain that you marry her soon. I'll do that. What have you been up to lately? I haven't seen you around. He glanced at me, as though you've been around. I was making some new friends. New friends? Should I be jealous? He studied me intently. I was approached by a dark-side mage, Mitch, someone who was apparently friends with Penny's old friend. I grabbed his throat. What threat is he? He pushed me off him and straightened his shirt. None of that. You're supposed to rest, remember? He's trying to make friends with all of Penny's mages. I've been looking into him. Seems he was raised in Dayside. Not much of a Darksider, then. I wouldn't say that. He made my skin prickle. He's got a lot of strength. I would say that you definitely need to be cautious with him. He hasn't approached me. You haven't been spending a lot of time hanging out where he could? I make a point of always being available. I'm seeing him again tonight. Do you want to come? You'd have to promise not to beat him up. Not that he wouldn't be honored. He speaks of you very highly. The green mage with absolutely no fashion sense. It's very Darksider of you. I stared at him shocked and outraged. He thinks I have no fashion sense. What I do is art. Do you have any idea how difficult it is to look good when I wear the things I wear? Like wolf ears. I reached up and pulled them off. Exactly. I stared at them while I couldn't help but smile. Ian, have you ever felt like that? Like everything you've ever wanted was within your grasp? I'm far too happy. The happier I am, the greater the fear that it will all end in a miserable avalanche of despair and anguish. Not really. It's actually greediness I feel. I want every moment to be so bright and brilliant. Like when her hurters melted off your flesh. I snapped my fingers and pointed at him. Exactly. That's why you're marrying her, isn't it? I shrugged. That, and Zach promised to give me her bond. I'm slightly possessive. Shall we go and see this mage? I'm very intrigued by him, and by what he may be able to tell you about her. I grinned at him. He knew me far too well. Should I dress up, or do I look okay like this? You'll wear the jacket no matter what I say. You haven't taken it off since you've gotten it. You waste so many spells on cleaning it and glamoring it to look like your uniform. I'm jealous. I ran my hands over the thick fabric. You should be. If Sooth hadn't sicked the tem on her, they'd find out soon enough because she's just too brilliant to hide. Sooth? I glanced at him. Let's not talk about him. He's terrible. I need to figure out a way to make my mercenaries all swear fealty to me so I can give them some of my immunity. Good luck with that. It's a work in progress. Now this mage, shall we? He smiled and stepped through side. I followed close behind, coming out in the alley beside our trusty tavern. How will I know him? I asked as we walked over the uneven cobblestones. He's hard to miss. With that helpful statement, I pushed open the heavy wooden door leading inside the low ceiling room. A mage sat in the center drinking a barrel of ale to the chanting and cheers of his companions, who all looked like the most disreputable Darksiders. His clothing was a mishmash of yellow and violet, colors not often found in Darkside, particularly in that intensity. I applauded politely when he slammed the barrel down on the floor to the howls of the other patrons before I walked over to the booth we usually inhabited. Hey, you're a Daysider, aren't you? Can you drink that much? I paused before I turned and stared at the mage. He seemed young, but he reeked of magic. That's what the crowd around him was. Darksiders who could sense his magic, maybe feed off it. No, very impressive. I couldn't possibly hold my own with that kind of single-minded consumption. I turned and continued my way to the booth where Ian was already settling down. You're the Green Mage, right? You've been fighting in random battles all over Darkside? I gave Ian a look before frowning at the mage. He was acting like a freshman who had no idea what he was getting into when he approached Drake Huntsman. I didn't know that anyone paid attention to me. Like you said, I'm just a random mage. He put a hand on my table. Can I buy you a drink? I stared at that hand for a long time. His hands were slender, well-articulated, too soft and straight to be Darksider hands. He was a Darksider, though. I shouldn't forget that. He'd learned to adapt to Dayside. I looked up, meeting his mismatched eyes with mine. I would be honored to have you share a drink with us, but please allow me to buy. His eyes narrowed just a hair before he grinned and slid into the booth beside Ian, leaning his elbows on the wood. He snapped his fingers, and I could feel the protection spell tighten around us. So you're friends with Poppy, I said with my own smile. His eyes brightened fractionally. I'm not sure you could say that. Poppy only had room in her life for one friend. I see. We stared at each other while my skin ached and my fingers curled, this close to turning into claws. I've never met your witch, he finally said, leaning back. You never will. His eyes narrowed. I don't know. I think she'd like to meet me, take a few feet of my flesh to turn into gloves. I hear she'll dye them purple. That's ridiculous. Penny Lane would look terrible in purple. Pink or gold, maybe green, is much more likely. He shrugged. Her other mage says purple. He seems to be closer to her than you are. I raised an eyebrow. This was supposed to bring my jealousy to a furious boil and reveal my hand. He is. They live in the same building. That does not mean that he understands her fashion sense better than I do. Why do you want to meet her? She's not an entirely gentle creature. She may very well shatter your handsome face. We share a common enemy. He's sometimes called Sooth. He's your enemy as well, isn't that right? His voice was carefully neutral, but there was rage underlying it. Sometimes. I mean, yes, of course, but sometimes he worms his way into being my master instead. It's very irritating. Irritating? His golden eye narrowed at me. Such a pretty eye. Irritating? I glanced over at Ian, who shrugged and glanced away. He didn't know what to do with an overwrought Darksider either. Usually emotions were buried beneath a world of waiting violence. I stood. That reminds me I need to get back to work. It's been such a pleasant experience sharing these few moments with you. Make certain to stay away from my witch, or I won't skin you, I'll eat you, raw, whole, and it will give me indigestion, so please don't. I turned away, but Mitch grabbed my arm. Wait, you don't understand what's at stake. I gripped his wrist until he flinched and took it off me. A Darksider flinching from something like a crushed wrist. How bizarre. He wasn't a very good Darksider. I don't. That is unfortunate. Very well. I'll sit back down and give you 2 minutes to make things clear. He scowled at me as I sat down and fingered my drink. I wasn't about to consume anything around this new threat. He wants to kill her, your witch. Wrong. He wants to capture her and use her alive. Anything else you have wrong? He blinked for a moment while his lips thinned. What does he want with her? My head ached. This mage might be sizzling with magic, but he had absolutely no subtlety or sense. Penny would probably like him if she wasn't busy killing him. That thought made me smile, Penny killing this mage. What do you want with her? I want to ally with her against Sooth. I want her help recruiting others like us. She's a beacon of... He frowned suddenly. What is she? A beacon of possibility. Possibility? Interesting. Others like you? Darksiders hidden or raised in Dayside to protect us until we could grow into our gifts? Protect you from Sooth? He shrugged and nodded, and others like him. So you're in so much danger that you feel it necessary to come into a notorious tavern and attract as much attention as possible in both behavior and dress. I suppose that makes sense. I glanced at Ian again, and he gave me a glimmering smile. No, this mage wasn't the brightest light bulb in the chandelier. Mitch shrugged and relaxed back against the back of the bench. I'm tired of hiding. You would stand up and become a target and take my witch with you. I should kill you now. His eyes narrowed. You should, but you won't. I raised my eyebrows. Why is that? You like to fight, not kill? You specifically avoid dealing death blows if you can help it? Really? Well, it's a matter of practicality. We're always hiring good fighters. It's inefficient to destroy something that could be turned into an asset. He nodded. Exactly. You think like a sorcerer, not a mage. I blinked at him and laughed. I'm a daysider. Daysiders don't ever become sorcerers. Everyone knows that. Look, I'd love to chat, continue this fascinating conversation, but like I said, I have things to do. You've met me, sated your curiosity. I expect to never hear about you again. His eyes glimmered, the two colors like flashing warning signs, telling me to tread carefully. I'm giving you the opportunity to ally with me. And I'm giving you the opportunity to walk away. We stared at each other for a few more seconds before Ian laughed and slapped Mitch's shoulder in a friendly assault. He's too modest to mention it, but Drake already has more allies than he knows what to do with. He has a special forces team that could easily wipe out a continent at a word from him. I'm not talking about his mercenary armies either. He has an entire school full of mages begging to work with him. What you offer, while I'm sure you mean well, comes off as a bit braggadocio. Give him a way to contact you in case he changes his mind. It could happen. Huntsman is always practical and rarely lets personal reasons stand in the way of business. Mitch looked at Ian before glancing down at the hand on his shoulder, then nodded and pulled out a coin. He tossed it at me and stood. I caught the coin, wrapping spells around it, just in case, but it was a simple coin that didn't seem to have anything interesting about it at all. Break it in half, and I'll come. If you're ever in a face-to-face battle with Sooth, I'd be honored to assist you. And there would go Huntsman Manor in a pile of rubble. I gave him a flat smile. He got up and disappeared in a puff of yellow smoke that smelled of sulfur and bananas. Ian wrinkled his nose. That has got to be the worst combination of scents possible. He's like that with everything, don't you think? I nodded. Certainly a mess of a mage. Penny would probably like him if she weren't determined to destroy him. What do you think he really wants? Ian studied me for a long time. Everyone wants a piece of Penny. It's a good thing she's going to marry you, be under the protection of Huntsman. How many days? I took a deep breath and tapped my mug, filling it with a much more appealing beverage. Orange bergamot tea, actually. I have no time to count. I need to run. Wish me luck. I stood and threw back the hot tea. Ow. Good luck, Drake. Happy hunting. If only hunting were on my agenda. No, it was enslavement. Such a bother. Blooming Black, Chapter 21. I went directly to the battlefront, dropping in on the tent where a huntsman commander was leaning over the folding table, frowning at a map. Good evening, I said after a few minutes when he didn't notice me. Sit, Master Huntsman. He didn't sound like he worked for me. I went to the camp chair, spelled myself safe, and promptly fell asleep. I woke up a little while later and listened to the commander arguing with the lieutenant. Our contract with Briarfar Mage specifically allows us a day off every 7 days, but these reports show consistent battling for 3 weeks. The hours seem consistent, but we've missed our day off 3 weeks running, and you haven't noticed? I sighed. His name's Sooth. He has his claws in Huntsman. Either I disband all our armies or get the commanders to swear fealty. And you thought I was here to enjoy the hospitality of your remarkably comfortable camp chair. The commander stared at me unblinking, his black eyes coals that burned brightly for a moment before he turned to his lieutenant. Dismissed. The lieutenant, a blonde and pasty daysider mage who couldn't be more than 22, scurried off. Why did I think he was a child when he had me by 4 years? I was clearly a bit mixed up. Master Huntsman, we haven't sworn fealty for hundreds of years. You're suggesting taking us back into the Dark Ages. I pointed at him. Exactly. Your grasp of matters is remarkably astute. I'm also considering going away from indoor plumbing, but that's iffy in Darkside anyway. I believe if you swear fealty to me and your men swear fealty to you, that should be sufficient. He picked up the contract and put it back down. You have immunity to the sorcerer? I nodded regally. Well, as regally as I could from the camp chair and bedazzled pants. He scowled at the space between us while he worked through the options. Interesting. I'd expected Pruitt to discount it immediately. He particularly disliked me. No contract, just sworn fealty. Would you maintain the conditions stated in the contract? I have no intention of trying to personally control hundreds of mages who are ambitious and cunning enough to make Commander and Huntsman's mercenaries. It's terrifying, the idea of having to be responsible for murderous cutthroats like you. Pruitt. He glowered at me. Tell me what the sorcerer has been doing. If you'd like. I'm so very obliging, but you won't remember. Perhaps you should take notes so that the next time I see you I can refer you to them and maybe we can make some headway. He didn't say anything. Just nodded and waited for me to continue, not taking notes. Sigh. Jasper made a deal a very long time ago, power in exchange for connection to this sorcerer, Soothe, who was supposed to be long dead. Sooth is dead. It would probably be his progeny we're dealing with. I shrugged. Either way, that breach is what this sorcerer is using to manipulate our armies. Manipulate as in every battle we've fought for the last month has been on the side opposite our contract. Mages are paying us to fight against them, and we haven't noticed. He got a look of, aha, he's interfering with your business. Now I understand. Pruitt thought that the only thing I was good for was business. I kind of wanted him to think that. It's easier when people have low expectations. Exactly. We can't have some uppity darksider sorcerer interfering with huntsman business. Well, Pruitt, are you up for it? If I swear fealty, you'll be responsible for my safety and well-being, including my family's, if anything happens to me. I blinked at him. I considered my mercenaries to be my responsibility anyway. Of course. That does sound pleasant. How is the witch? The kiddos? Don't you have a son who graduates from Blackheart this spring? He's very good. Hopefully we'll have everything cleared up by then. I don't think it's wise for us to take new recruits until this whole thing is resolved. I smiled at him cheerfully while my stomach churned at the idea of being personally responsible for other mages, their health, happiness, as well as anything psychotic they chose to do. His son was rash. That was most of why I'd beaten it so badly at the winter's tourney. That and Teddy kissed Penny. Pruitt's eyes narrowed as though he'd heard about it. I'll consider your offer. I rolled my eyes and stood. Suit yourself. Would you mind telling your fellow commanders what madness I'm pursuing so that I don't have to visit every one of them? I'm not sure if verbal reports would be safer than written ones. Thoughts? Personal notes should be adequate. I nodded. All right then. Now that we've gotten that all figured out, I'm off. The next dozen or so meetings went a lot like that, with varying levels of dismissiveness or respect. The first commander to agree was a Darksider. I'd been saving them for last because you know how Darksiders are. Well, I thought I knew. Viciously independent, greedy, almost when it came to personal freedom and liberty. I'd walked into the dreary tent to find the Darksider commander at the table, drinking. When he saw me, he immediately poured me a drink. I dropped into the seat opposite him. Master Huntsman, what are you going to do about the enemy? I lifted my glass and swirled the contents, pink and slightly bubbling. If my commanders swear fealty, they'll have my protection and immunity. If not, I shrugged. You're here for my fealty? He scowled, his ominous rowbone low over his dark, flinty eyes. I cleared my throat and sniffed at the pink stuff. It reminded me of Penny. Isn't that horrible? He pulled out a knife, raised it, and then slashed his palm, held out the knife, and stood there bleeding while I stared at him. Do you want to finish this? I'm going to dry up soon, he said in his thick Darksider accent. He spoke English very well, though. Also was bleeding all over the place. I took the knife and cut across my palm. He grabbed it, and we stood there bleeding together dramatically. I swear fealty to you. You are my master. I give you my strength, my wisdom, my magic, and my will. Right? You're my vassal who I will give my protection, immunity, and, that's pretty much it over you and yours. Hallelujah? He raised his eyebrows. It was church rubbing off on me, and Penny Lane. Our date had been going so nicely. Done. He dropped his hand and wiped it on his handkerchief, a surprisingly clean handkerchief. He must have kept it spelled to be so white and fresh. Well, before he wiped the blood off, it had been white and fresh. Wait, I was supposed to channel the dragon, like with Jasper. I grabbed the man's face with my still bloody hand and felt the darkness roar through me as the deeply paranoid and vicious dragon poured into him. After a few seconds of ebbing fury, I blinked the green out of my eyes to see the mage staring at me, looking rather shocked. I let go of his face, leaving a bloody handprint. That might work for a good intimidation strategy. He fell to one knee and bowed his head. We're actually finished now, I told him. You truly are, the dragon mage. Well, I suppose that's true. I charge you as my first minion to not tell anyone else about it. Any men who swear under me will know. And you'll require them to not tell anyone else about it. He glanced up at me, a slight smile on his mouth, a mouth not made for smiling. The great dragons have returned. In the ancient days, all men swore fealty for protection from the lines of great houses. I am the first in this age. He nodded like that was a great honor. Maybe I did need to hang out with Darksiders more often. I clearly did not understand them. Congratulations. Any ideas of how to take care of this more efficiently? He frowned. Daysider mages won't understand. You may have to replace your current commanders. I know you will see that as leverage to manipulate them into accepting your offer, but it's necessary that you have personally loyal men as your commanders. Forget men actually adept at strategy and management. I shook my head. This was going to be a disaster. He shrugged. It doesn't do you any good to have an efficient commander who's fighting on the wrong side. I'm already beginning to be illuminated. Very well. If you have any questions, you can probably... I stopped talking as he popped inside my head, as in, his awareness was there, like old, dead dragon voices. I nodded. Perfect. Pepper, I didn't know you had a first name. I gave him a flat smile and pushed his head out. I could do that very easily since I was his master. Otherwise, I'd have to decapitate him or something. I stepped through side, came out in my bedroom, glanced at my bed on the off chance that Penny Lane was in it, then stepped back into Darkside at the next camp, this one led by a Darksider commander. Things progressed smoothly from that point on, almost too smoothly. After I had 25 vassals, I had to take a break and do something about my headache. Also, letting that many people know that great dragons were back, that I was a master. I'd been avoiding it for a long time. I'd have to talk to Ian Teddy. Ian was easy enough to find, but Teddy wouldn't answer my texts. He was clearly in Darkside, probably playing assassin with the Ruby, the mage who would kill Penny if it looked like she'd joined the sorcerer. I flung myself on my bed while I waited and promptly fell asleep. I woke up to my phone buzzing. The green mage deigns to summon me. Oh, good. He was in a bad mood. Maybe he'd try to kill me and we could play. That would be so much more pleasant than going back into Darkside to deal with more commanders. The ones that accepted were far worse than the ones who refused. Who else when I need the finest assassin? Teddy was in my room the next moment, staring down at me in his black silk outfit. So fancy, Teddy, and so beautiful. Ian, don't you think so? Ian sat up where he'd been laying on my couch. Unutterably fancy. What's going on, Drake? It's late or early depending on how you look at it. Yes, Drake, Teddy said crisply, his sneer on his beautiful mouth. What troubles you? Do you need me to sponge your brow? How did you know? I sighed and sat up. They had a hard time taking me seriously when I was lounging on my bed. The thing is, this sorcerer's playing my father at Huntsman Manor. Jasper has given him access to our deepest trust. The only way around that was offering fealty to my commanders. I actually had a few mad enough to accept. They're in my head, and since it's my dragon's immunity I'm giving them, they are now aware of the rise of the great dragons. They are sworn to secrecy, but I thought you should know. Teddy looked thoughtful instead of murderous. What numbers are we talking about? So far, 25 commanders, each one with 2,500 men, that's... Enough, Ian growled, his scowl furious. He wasn't as happy about this as Teddy. Interesting, since I'd already mentioned it to him. You don't think you should have brought this up before you did it? I stared at him. Weren't you here earlier? Maybe that was Sooth as well. I officially despise deception sorcerers. They are the worst. My head hasn't stopped aching for weeks. Ian's scowl didn't budge. You had to tell them? They're in here. I tapped my head. Also, they feel the immunity, the dragon. I think some might miss it, but Darksiders are attuned to things like viciousness. Nothing else feels like dragon. Did you mention us? I swore them to secrecy about me, but didn't feel like you merited a mention. Does that hurt your feelings? Drake, Teddy said, stepping between my line of sight and Ian. You have the fealty of over 62,000 experienced mages. I'm surprised you only have a headache. That's a lot of mages. I blinked at him. I have 25. I'm not sure how many of their soldiers accepted fealty. Are you saying my headache is going to get worse? Any other side effects I should know about? He shrugged. You have the dragon to worry about already. This shouldn't be worse than that unless it compounds it because you're accessing the dragon so widely. He nodded. It will be interesting to observe you. He made the madness seem so rational. Will you be Penny's contract mage? He raised his eyebrows. because you can't trust Jasper or your money. It would be my pleasure. He smiled, his soft lips and his black eyes danced. I sighed. She's been contacted twice by the Temb. His expression went from evil seducer to brilliant tactician. Was assault involved? They interrupted our date. We didn't get to climb trees. Excellent. We'll send a suit to pay for damages. I'll charge you for my services. Ian laughed. If he's got a sorcerer in his house, you should send the bill to Penny. She can pay you out of whatever you get for her. That'll motivate you. If you need another fund source, consider Stoneborough. He's got lovely coffers. You're her mage. I could send the bill to you. Or Jackson. It would be nice to put some screws in that mage. All of us nodded and smiled at each other. What was it about Jackson that made me dislike him so much? Probably the fact that he ignored that I was superior to him in absolutely every way. Do you think they're ready? Ian asked, breaking our moment of companionable dislike. The dragons? I shrugged. If the sorcerers are stirring, the dragons won't be far behind. In this case, I don't seem to have much choice. Either I go medieval or I'll spend the rest of my life running around in circles while this sorcerer wags my tail. You said he's in Dayside? Is he interfering with business? I stared at him. Business? As in huntsmanins. Why would a sorcerer do that? He shrugged elegantly. I've heard that battles get expensive. Huntsman could be a nice little piggy bank for a Darksider with a head for it, or a mage like Jasper who worked for him. My blood went a bit chilly. Not ice cold, not with dragon blood running through my veins. I should eat him, the sorcerer. No, I didn't eat sorcerers. Jello should eat him. I rubbed my forehead as I went to grab my laptop. That would be extremely unfortunate with my upcoming wedding if we couldn't pay for cake. Cake. You're getting married. Teddy smiled slightly. I can't wait to kiss the bride. I punched slow and easy so he had time to duck, and that would ruin my honeymoon. I'd spend the entire time ripping apart mages. The honeymoon, I haven't had time to work on it. You didn't put it in the contract? Teddy asked, itching to see the papers. I had asked him to be her contract mage. I already felt deep regret. And you have to give her a wedding present worthy of her engagement gift to you, Ian grinned. It's going to be difficult to top. What did she give you? Teddy asked. He's huntsman. What could be worth more than money? Ah, he said with a lecherous sneer. Ian rolled his eyes and grabbed the lapel of my precious coat. She made this. It soaked into him like a second skin. Tell me you wouldn't marry a witch for a coat like that. Teddy and Ian started running their hands all over the jacket, making appropriate oohing and awing sounds until I pushed them off me. Enough. I'm working on it somehow in between dealing with misguided armies. Once the two of you get handsy, the meeting is officially adjourned. Until next time, gentle mages. Ian smiled and Teddy sneered before they both stepped through side to whatever destination they chose to bring in the new day. I had business to take care of, and wedding presents.
Blooming Black, Chapter 22. What are you going to wear? Finey asked, arms crossed as she leaned against the hideous lilac floral couch. I looked down at my usual school uniform. Skirt a teeny bit shorter than your standard and more creamsicle than blah khaki. You think my skirt should be shorter? You're getting married on Valentine's Day. Are you going to wear a red and pink heart-shaped dress, or what? I blinked at her. Oh, I can't decide. She chewed on her thumbnail until she rolled her eyes, grabbed my wrist, and dragged me into her sacred sanctum. The all-black hole she called her bedroom. I saw this and thought of you. It's a totally free gift. You know, you don't have to pay me in herders or anything if you happen to like it. She gave me a tiny smile that was pretty much a nightmare come real. Ding-dongs and ho-hoos. I don't know who you think you're fooling, I muttered as I followed her, then stopped and stared at the pale pink peony that bloomed against the black of her wall. I gasped and clasped my hands as the prettiness of the delicate thing sang to me. It was a flower, also silk, organza, chiffon, with an underlayer of dupioni to hold up all the fluttering ruffles. It was nothing more than the most perfect and beautiful gown in the entire world. It would take me hundreds of hours to sew on all of those pieces of fabric that cascaded onto the floor. I petted it, the silk sliding over my fingers a bit like Drake's super soft skin inside his elbows. I blushed and beamed at Viney. I threw my arms around her while she tensed up. I take it you like it. You don't have to pay for it in herders if you don't want to. I pulled back and shook my head at my spiky-haired friend. You are so obvious, it's kind of cute. 3 herders, but don't think you can buy me any time I need a wedding dress. Also, I'm running low on a few things you'll have to secure for me. She nodded and kept nodding like a bobblehead or something. I ruffled her hair and she snarled, but didn't bite me. She tried to smile again. I don't even care if they're pink. I'd prefer something a little more on the pitch end of your spectrum. You know, you do make herders like hers. But whatever you want. I shuddered. Stop that right now. Gushing gets no herders. She pressed her lips into a thin line and nodded. I rolled my eyes and went back to stroking the dress. Where did you get this? France. I had it shipped as soon as I saw it online. Do you want to see the shoes that came with it? I shivered and swallowed. The shoes were beautiful, swede pumps with cut-out toes and a dainty ankle strap. They were almost softer than the dress. Viney, you're diabolical. These are perfect. You should be a professional shopper. I should. Unfortunately, my mother would hire an assassin if I did. Zach cleared his throat loudly from the doorway, and I stopped petting the shoes while Viney tried to look innocent. Speaking of assassins, is there a reason Teddy Prince gave you his card? He held up a little business card and managed to look messy, cranky, and adorable at the same time. What does that black heart want with Penny? Viney snarled. I put a hand on her shoulder before she could grab the card and shred it into confetti. Drake suggested him. Something about suing the Tem for ruining my date. Viney stared at me. What do the team want with you? Never mind. She glared at Zach. Can't you fix this? He shrugged and pulled the card out of my reach. Penny won't sign my contract. Doesn't want Stoneborough to own her or something crazy like that. She has no idea what an honor it is. Stoneborough doesn't own just anybody. Viney scowled. If Prince is being paid, he shouldn't mess around, right? Right. I lunged and grabbed the card. Zach wouldn't let go, so we struggled for a few seconds until he tickled me. I was rolling on Viney's bed while my body convulsed and shook. Not fair, I gasped while tears ran down my cheeks and Zach's fingers probed the most ticklish part of my ribs. He didn't touch my missing ribs, which he couldn't have done since they were long gone. Anyway, it was very sweet of him. He stopped tickling me, and I gasped while he leaned over me, his eyes bright and alive like his smile. That was a real smile. A Zach smile. A Zach smile. I touched his mouth, and he flinched back like I'd punched him. Take it, he snarled, throwing the card at my face. I caught it out of the air between my fingers carefully so it didn't give me a paper cut. I sat up slowly while he stalked out of the room, giving my dress a sneer on his way out. Poor Zach. You should sign the contract, Viney said. Stoneborough will protect you. Poor Zach? Why poor Zach? Viney flopped onto her bed beside me. Are you kidding? You aren't. So, Zach has trouble relating to people. He spends tons of energy and time on someone fictional, and you're not only his link to that, bringing the dream into the realms of actual real life. You're his friend. Zach doesn't have friends, other than Drake, who makes friends easier than any other mage I know. Are you going to call Teddy? If you have a meeting, I want to be in on it. For purely protective reasons, nothing to do with watching him sit there looking dangerously beautiful. I frowned at her. Hey, you have Oscar to drool over. He's super gorgeous. She rolled her eyes. I like Oscar. I wouldn't ever like Teddy Prince. He's worse than heartless. What about you? Do you like him? I laughed. How would it be possible for me to like anyone other than Drake? No, Teddy is pretty, but I like redheads best. Her smile tightened. She still had a lingering thing for Drake. She couldn't seem to help it. Good. So take the dress out of here, okay? It's making my room look like a candy shop. I picked it up in my arms and spun around as gracefully as possible, twirling like a ballerina into the commons room, only to stop suddenly when I saw Ian, of all people. We need to schedule our training. Same time as last fall? What about Zach? Do you need a chaperone again? I glanced at Zach's closed door. Why did he really want me to sign his contract? Was he really afraid he'd lose me? He owned me. I owned him. Twice. What kind of losing could possibly happen? We should be okay. Zach and I are still weird. You know that I belong to Drake. He nodded, his smile never dimming. So do I, in my own way. You're as safe with me as any mage. Is that the wedding dress? It's phenomenal. It's a pity I won't get to see you wear it. You're getting married at your parents', right? I nodded. Is that okay? Do you think Drake would rather have a big wedding with family and friends? He stopped smiling and pursed his lips instead. Macaroons, his mouth was like the focal point of his face. Such an expressive, soft, compelling mouth. Not that it was the right mouth, but it certainly drew the eye. Small and intimate sounds more honest. With a crowd, Drake would have to put on a show. Will anyone from his family be there? I shook my head. Revere wouldn't allow it. He put a hand on my shoulder. You make him very happy. He has a lot of friends, but he needs family. My heart flipped at the idea of Drake needing me. Really? Thanks, Ian. He squeezed my shoulder and stepped away. Maybe I shouldn't say anything, but be careful with Zach. What do you mean? You think he's going to light my hair on fire? I think he'll probably actually hurt himself. What do you mean? I grabbed his shirt and jerked him closer to me. He smiled and covered my hand with his, making me aware of how close he was and how dangerous that was. I mean that he's got a tender heart. Be careful with it. I cocked my head, completely thrown off. You think he's in danger of heart attack. I should make sure he avoids high cholesterol or something. He laughed, low and golden. Don't forget about your friend, Zachary Stoneborough, no matter how much Drake smothers you with his infinite charm. You'll be married very soon, and I'm sure Drake will make you very happy, but it costs Zach. He could look at it as losing both of you. I frowned at him. Seriously, you're incredibly insightful. You should go into psychology or something. He smirked. My couch is available anytime, Penny Lane. He tipped an imaginary hat at me and started on his way out. Wait, Ian, what about Teddy Prince? Should I hire him as my contract mage? Will he charge exorbitant fees? He'd probably work for your herders. I don't know anyone who wouldn't. I pursed my lips. I'd better get started then. I put my dress away and then went to pound on Zach's door. He opened it with a snarl on his face. What? I'm in desperate need of an assistant who knows what to do with a Bunsen burner. Do you know anyone who likes to meddle in chemical compounds? That reminds me I need to give Vine my list. She's stalking me. He hesitated before he sighed and shrugged. Fine. He followed me into my room and immediately began laying out equipment. I trained him well. After making herders all evening, I called horror movie and ended up on the couch between Viney and Zach. I grabbed Zach's wrist while his hip was against mine, where he'd carved his ugly business logo. I squeezed tightly for a second, and Viney handed me the popcorn. Then a guy jumped out with a chainsaw, and I screamed, flinging the popcorn into the air like an eruption. Zach sighed and picked a piece of popcorn out of my hair and popped it into his mouth. He wouldn't lose either Drake or me, However psychotic he got. He was my poppy. The next day was classes plus Ian and me in our regular studio afterwards. It was like old times. Ian had me stand there for an hour adjusting my posture and making me do miserable basics. 10 do ply, so slow I was shaking before our 3-hour block was half over. I grabbed onto his arm, the one that had his bond carved into it. "Can we take a break?" His lips curved, like I'd said something suggestive. "Of course. I belong to you, Miss Lane. Whatever you desire is my deepest pleasure." I pulled away from him and rubbed my fingers together like they'd gotten banana peel goop on them. No. Words. I'll take that as a no. Maybe I should have Zach here after all. He shrugged. As I said, your wish is my command. At least he hadn't said pleasure that time. That word and Ian were way too much for me. I shook my head and concentrated on performing as perfectly as possible. I was better than I'd been 6 months before, but Ian only pushed me harder for all of that. Whatever. I could cope with it. Afterwards, I only crawled down a few hallways before Zach picked me up and carried me under his arm like I weighed nothing. I'm not turkey. What would I be doing with a turkey? I sighed and went limp, so he had my dead weight. He grunted but didn't say anything. I shouldn't just let Zach carry me around the school, but he was headed towards dinner and I could eat a turkey, and a zebra, and a Zach. I turned my head and nibbled on his side. He jumped and almost dropped me. Penny, if you do that, I'll let you crawl the rest of the way. You'd probably like that. You have no sense of shame. Shameless. That's the word for me. Also inane. Shamelessly inane. Inanely shameless. I think I'll put it on my business card in pretty font. Lots of swirls. Make sure it's scented and also tastes like roses and vanilla frosting. Like those candy roses on cakes? Cakes? I haven't thought about cakes. What if we have no cake? I'll have to ask Revere to make a cake. Also the house. It's not cute. It's like a horror movie. So you walk around screaming constantly? I sighed as Zach dropped me at a table. Constantly. Will you get me food? I don't really care what it is, except it has to be amazing. He rolled his eyes and left me to watch him and think about cake. What about decorations? I didn't have to worry about invitations because only I was coming. But I should make me one anyway. Maybe Drake too. What about Zach and Viney? We should have some kind of party for all of his friends. Mine too. I had friends, sort of. My chem girls. Lester, Lars, Barry. Yeah, we could definitely do a party afterwards. Would Zach come? He thumped a large tray of food down and sat across from me, taking a drumstick like it was a challenge. Zach, I'll sign a contract with you on 2 conditions. He ripped savagely into the chicken, but his eyes glittered slightly as he chewed until he finally said, What weird random stuff do you want? 3 conditions. He rolled his eyes. Are you going to tell me, or am I supposed to guess? There is no possible way for me to anticipate you. Number 3, I want to have unlimited supplies of whatever I want. His lips twitched. Done. Number 2, you have to come to my wedding party when I get back. He shrugged. Whatever. I'll even give you a present. Number 1. I reached over the food, getting gravy on my elbow as I put my hand on his forehead like I was checking for a fever. I could feel the energy there, the connection that throbbed against my palm. You have to always be my friend first, no matter what. He stared at me beneath my hand, then finally covered it with his own, greasy from chicken. Sure, I'll be your poppy. Shut up and eat.
Blooming Black, Chapter 23. Endless nights passed working on the wedding present or in Darkside, the air heavy and cloying around whatever commander knelt at my feet, or lay on his back, or offered me his favorite weapon. My head ached worse with every passing day, but it didn't seem so bad when I saw Penny Lane walking down the hall in her ridiculously short skirts and our eyes would meet, only for a moment. But the look in those soft hazel eyes gave me more strength than anything, except for my mage jacket. That gave me strength and love. Everything seemed possible, bordering on inevitable. Nothing could keep us apart. We were fated, destined, meant to be. All I had to do was my best. Everything else would fall in line. It was a mess. Paperwork, of course. I had my commanders submitting complaints against other companies fighting against them, and, of course, I had to point out that they were fighting on the wrong side, and our dayside mages would get to feel frustrated and humiliated. Pruitt offered me his resignation, which I accepted with relief. I dispersed his men to other companies, giving them the option to retire, quit, or swear fealty. In the midst of the unimaginable chaos of trying to turn a machine like Huntsman's mercenaries in a new direction, it was surprisingly well managed as the Darksiders began their serious work, which as far as I could tell was to make Daysider mages look like idiots. I got back late one night or early in the morning, and not all that early to find Jasper waiting for me in a neat tan suit, holding a briefcase in his hands. I took off my jacket and started unbuttoning my shirt. My bath was calling me. "What's up, Jasper? Is that my wedding present?" "I'm leaving. I'll keep my pants on if you have something worth saying." He gave me a look that I'd never seen before. Concern etched his features with a healthy dose of anger. "I confronted him this afternoon, not as the sorcerer, but as your father. I tendered my resignation." My legs collapsed and I sat suddenly on the edge of my bed. "You're leaving Huntsman, Inc. Leaving me? Very well. Have you talked with resources about severance pay and your benefits? If you'd resigned to me, I could have prepared everything along with a nice card of appreciation. You've done exemplary work with a notoriously difficult family. If there is ever anything that you require, don't hesitate to ask. If you ever wish to return, you'll be welcomed without question." He frowned at me until his face slipped back into the gentle concern that was his trademark. He put a hand on my shoulder. "I can't actually resign to anyone other than your father. I am still working on the problem. It is my responsibility for introducing such a faction into your family. I will not rest until it is resolved. I'm not abandoning you, Drake, or your father. I swallowed a sudden thickness in my throat. "You're only saying that because you have to. I did make you my vassal, you know." He smiled and sighed at the same time. "Indeed, you're doing excellent work in Darkside with the armies. How are you holding up?" I rubbed my forehead. "My head aches. Hold on a moment, if you don't mind." I grabbed his face and sank my awareness into him, checking for the bonds, the Jasperness of him. I'd had a sudden horrible feeling that it was Sooth I was talking to, and he'd stuck Jasper in some Darkside hole once he realized Jasper had discovered his secret. I pulled away and stared at him. "You're Jasper?" He nodded and shuddered. That was unpleasant. "Thank you. How is business? Anything I should know about?" Jasper frowned. "Over the last few weeks, I've put several deals into motion that I don't remember and can't trace. It's one of the things I'm going to be working on. I put some safeguards in place, registered with the Council's suspicious business activity, possibly related to madness. That should give you some protection." "I appreciate it. Those legalities took so much red tape and paperwork, you were better off starting from scratch with your business." Mages went mad fairly often, so families were protected from their mad relatives' decisions, but proving a mage was influenced by madness wasn't the easiest thing, and if the deal involved Darkside, it was very, very difficult to order a reversal. If the deal benefited another family of wealth and influence in Dayside, it was impossible. Taking advantage of the mad wasn't supposed to be legal, but it was extremely difficult to prove. Hopefully, the Darkside sorcerer wouldn't be capable of doing anything irrevocable to Huntsman. "How are the wedding plans coming?" I smiled because I was going to marry Penny and everything would be perfect for at least 20 seconds. Viney gave her a wedding dress. It's supposed to be ridiculously beautiful. Penny is obsessing about cake, ordering all different kinds and making everyone she meets try them and compare them. They're for the party afterwards. She's got Teddy working as her contract mage, and she's signed with Stoneborough. He nodded soberly. She'll be well protected. I'm glad to hear it. She's a treasure. My treasure. You're welcome to join us at the after-party. Perhaps, if I'm certain I'm not a danger. He pulled out a sheaf of papers from his briefcase with shaky fingers and handed them to me. Watch these accounts and take care of yourself. You don't have to worry. He stepped through side, leaving me alone with paperwork. Typical, I muttered. For a minute my chest ached vaguely. I sat down with the paperwork and my laptop checking numbers while I rubbed my chest. I sent Ian to Huntsman Manor for my tuxedo. When he came back, he gave off a prickly vibe. That's the sorcerer. He plays the part of dutiful father very well. He wanted to know when the wedding was. You told him. Ian shrugged. I sang drunkenly. I couldn't have possibly been coherent. Also, I mentioned next week instead of this one. Tomorrow, you're leaving tomorrow. She's already ordered the limo. I cannot get over the idea that Drake Huntsman will be married. Have you resolved upon your strategy? I shook out the tuxedo. I'll put it in my best garment bag spelled against wrinkling. He punched my shoulder, rather hard. You're marrying a sweet, dulcet creature who never kissed a mage before she met you. Don't tell me you haven't planned the details of the wedding night exhaustively. Also, what about the honeymoon? Ian and I have not planned the details. We'll be staying at her mother's house. For all I know, we may be kept in opposite wings for the duration of our wedding and the honeymoon afterwards. Also, we're talking about Penny Lane. She may be sweet, but she's also bizarre. Our first kiss was precipitated by her being stuck in a bucket. She may faint any time I take off an article of clothing. I do intend to bring my Tofat and my mouse. Also, I'll wear pink silk boxers. He frowned at me. You think pink underwear will do it? I shrugged. No idea. That's my point. Don't worry. As for the technicalities, I am adept enough, even if I'm not as notorious as the Golden Mage. He sniffed. I suppose you're right. Not that you need my advice, but if I were you, I'd start by singing to her badly, then feed her vast quantities of food. After her tongue is sated, I'd light her clothing on fire so she has to take them off. I laughed and grabbed him in a headlock. Diabolical, Ian. Utterly diabolical. That might just work. I let go of him and grinned while he shook his head and grinned back at me. I can't help but think about seduction. It's nothing personal. I know. You do like her, though, don't you? He raised his eyebrows. You want me to like her? Why would you care? I shrugged. It made no sense except that I wanted her to be accepted by all of my friends. Do you? He hesitated before he nodded. She owns me most conscientiously. She doesn't forget to feed her pets. She doesn't complain when I push her past the point of comfort and ballet. She's coming along nicely. She has beautiful feet. Also, she loves. It's a dangerous trait to have, but it's difficult not to be drawn to her. But you don't love her. He rolled his eyes. Love? Me? I learned my lesson about the inefficacy of love a long time ago. Wit? Do you still see her? We've had a few conversations. She keeps her distance. She's learned her lesson as well. Things that are gold burn. His eyes narrowed. Green burns as well. Will you hurt her? I stared at him. Hurt my treasure? She isn't my enemy, but my possession. If she ever resists being possessed by you. Why would she? I'll give her every preposterous thing her heart craves. So that's the plan. Make her so happy she never realizes she's imprisoned. Who is imprisoning her? I'm allowing her to work with Stoneborough. I'm allowing Prince to be her contract mage. I'm even allowing her to associate with Lester. I'm specifically not keeping her captive, Ian. I put so much effort into setting up balances to keep her from being at my mercy. Why do you think I allow you to dance with her? You're feeling protective. Good. She is mine, we both know that, but not mine to ruin. Now it's yours to love, he said softly with a sad smile. If you had to give her up to save her, could you? He shook his head. Ignore me. Weddings make me nauseous, morose, and other unattractive things. He flung himself on my couch. Do you want to go drinking all night? Maybe Zach has your bachelor party planned. I shook my head. I don't have time for that kind of thing. I'm going to be gone for a few days. Everything has to be in order. You're coming to the big after-wedding party, right? It's going to have a lot of cake. He nodded. Of course. I love cake. Nothing better than to eat cake and watch two other people who are disgustingly happy. Good. I might show her my dragon. He raised his eyebrows. I see. You don't object. She's going to be married to you. She'll like Jello. She loves dangerous creatures. I smiled at him and packed my tuxedo. She was waiting at the limo in a pink dress with a frilly white slip beneath the hem. Her legs were bare, probably cold, in the drive in front of the pillared library. She licked her pink lips when she saw me, and her eyes brightened. "You came." I nodded. "It's in the contract. Are my bags already in the trunk?" She nodded. "Yes. Pete brought them. You've been so busy, I barely see you anymore. You won't skip fortune cookies on Tuesdays after we're married, will you?" "It's in the contract." I walked over to her and bent to brush her lips with mine. Her lips were cold, soft, and unbearably sweet. I will never miss another fortune cookie again. I swear it. She looked up at me, eyes soft, lips parted. "And Sunday tea parties." I kissed her again. Would things be all right without me for a few days? They had to be. She'd been very clear about her house not being somewhere I could step through side any time I got bored. I had to stay there until Revere released me. I should probably be more nervous than I was. I was nervous enough about being with Penny. The limo ride was spent with her in my arms in the back of a limo. I drowned in her for 2 hours until she pulled away and blinked at me. "I need a lollipop." She went through lollipops like a frantic, if adorable gopher. She sat on the far side of the limo with me on the other, apparently finished kissing me for the time being. She wouldn't hold still. "Is something wrong, my darling fiance?" Death, destruction, and misery home by any other name. I laughed and barely kept from reaching over and dragging her against me. Should I pull out my fire sword? No. Oh, no, that won't help. She unrolled the window and leaned out into the icy cold breeze that brought goosebumps out on her bare shoulders. She stuck her head all the way out and stared ahead while I watched her shiver. Finally, she pulled her head in and rolled up the window. I reached over, putting my hands over hers. "You're freezing. Would you like to wear my jacket?" It was my mage coat, the one she'd made me, but I'd spelled it a nice black. She shook her head. "I have a pink faux fur shrug on the floor if I were cold, or if I didn't want to feel cold. I mean, it helps to feel something, distracts from those things in my head. Thoughts. Do you ever feel like everything is going to come crashing down around you?" She took a shuddering breath. "Actually, I feel the opposite. Is that strange? I have this lovely false confidence. I'll share it with you if you'd like. Picture a piece of cake. It's pink and a baby polar bear is eating it." She cocked her head and stared at me. "Okay, also a leprechaun." I grinned as I raised my hand to tenderly brush her cheek, smoothing back a strand of luminous red-gold hair. "This is hard for you, but it's something that would be better done now rather than later, isn't it?" She took a deep breath and nodded. "Right, better to get married quickly." I bent and kissed her shoulder. "Much better. Are you getting the jitters?" "They're perfectly normal. I have a lot of ideas how to help you overcome them. I could tie you up." I gave her a flirty wink. "My bed at home is made out of monkey skulls." She chewed on her bottom lip. "I'm taking you to meet my mother. She's kind of crazy. She might seduce you or kill you." I pulled her onto my lap, wrapped my arms around her, and buried my face in her hair. A monkey skull bed. Was there anything more delightful? My heart pounded while I kept her like that, just holding onto her for a long time. After a while, I moved back so I could look into her eyes. I was lost in her soft gaze for a moment before I spoke low. "Thank you." She wrinkled her nose and pressed her face back against my neck. "You can thank me later after we've survived." I laughed and slid my hands up her back to her neck beneath her clouds of hair. Death by mother-in-law, it has a ring to it. She smiled before she stiffened up and began counting. She slid off me and reached up to undo the sunroof. She stuck her head out and held on while the limo took a curve and headed towards a bridge. "I'm you know it, Chook, now. And the whole world wants to tell you again something in houses. I'm bad." I stared at her legs while she sang at the top of her lungs the worst rendition I'd ever heard. The limo bumped over an old bridge filled with iced-over potholes. When we were on the other side of the bridge, she ducked down into the limo and smiled brightly. "Yeah, this is going to get much weirder." I shrugged casually. "Not that weird. I'm sorry I didn't get to join in. Next time you'll have to warn me." She rolled her eyes and muttered something about the inevitability of life. She sat on the edge of the seat, peering out the window. She unrolled the driver's window and leaned over to stare at the man's balding spot. "Hey, Would you stop up here on the side of the road for 1 minute and 25 seconds, please? He gave me a nervous look and nodded at her with a polite smile. He'd clearly dealt with this sort of madness before. Still made him a teeny bit uncomfortable. I gave him a reassuring nod. He'd be tipped very well. Great. The driver pulled over and Penny got out. She leaned back in, almost bashing my face with hers as I moved to follow her. I'll be right back. Don't get out, okay? Don't move. I stared at her. There was something in her eyes that communicated more than her bright smile. Sure. No grabbing, no moving. She turned and ran around the car 5 times before she ducked back inside, cold and panting. She slammed the door behind her, and then after a little while the limo pulled out again. You do like 5s? She nodded and held her breath for the rest of the trip up to the house. I didn't dare touch her. She clearly needed space to keep from exploding. This was an interesting side of her. The limo pulled up in the desolate circle in front of the rickety porch beneath a Gothic Victorian monstrosity that had seen better days. She took my hand. Are you sure you're okay with this? I nodded soberly and squeezed her hand. This was the time for sincerity, not play. Very. Do we begin juggling now, or do we wait until dinner? She tilted her head sideways. I would tell you not to be ridiculous, but you may as well. It won't make this whole thing any worse. We got out and climbed the creaky stairs to the porch. Penny shifted from foot to foot. If I ring the doorbell and wait for Revere to come, then I won't have to try to not be killed by all the stuff in the foyer, but it would put us on the defensive, waiting for him to look us up and down before deciding whether or not we were worthy to enter. I reached over and pushed on the doorbell while I smiled at her. I'm Drake Huntman. I'm always worthy whether I am or not. Are you more nervous about seeing your mother or marrying me? She hesitated. It's more the statue in the hall. I hate it. I raised my eyebrows. I see. I don't see. I shrugged. You haven't thrown up yet, so you're doing very well. She smiled slightly, but kept pulling on a strand of her hair. It's not that kind of fear. Never mind. It's not worth mentioning. It's just that it killed someone, and I had to clean up the blood. The statue killed someone. So you're actually logically afraid of the statue because it comes alive and kills people in a very brutal way. Interesting. It's not like that. No, because that would make sense. It's something else, something like... I shook my head. I have no idea. The door creaked open and Revere stood there holding a candelabra. Welcome to the home of serene night. Blooming Black, Chapter 24. I stared at the tall man who looked as hollowed and sharp as the last time I'd seen him. Thank you. Will you get the bags, or should I? He glanced at the limo and sighed. I'll take care of it. I'll put your things in the garret. Your mother is waiting in the velvet parlor, Penny. She's eager to meet your gentleman. Penny winced and started muttering sweets under her breath before she darted through the doorway, keeping close to the wall as though a volley of arrows were about to fly. I followed, being as furtive as she was, on guard for the deadly statue. She pulled up suddenly, and I almost ran into her. She stared at an enormous statue of a knight on a horse, his spear pointed up, waiting, ready. The waiting soldier, she whispered, gripping my hand so tight I couldn't feel my fingers. I squeezed back. Do you want me to distract him while you make a run for it? I could throw my shoes at him to draw him off. She wrinkled her nose and shook her head at me. Maybe later. By the way, my mother is a little bit like a drug. What kind of drug? She shook her head and led me into a relatively small room with a cheery fire in the hearth, golden bricks surrounding it while green swags covered the windows. Bookshelves and paintings covered most other surfaces. There was an obvious blank spot above the fireplace where a portrait used to hang. Penny took my hand for a moment, squeezing it before she sank into a green velvet wingback beside the fire. She pulled up her knees and wrapped her arms around them while she stared at the flickering flames. Would you care for a drink, Huntsman? The voice was low but soft, a sound that caught the attention and reeled it in. I turned towards the woman who stood near the tea cart opposite the fireplace. I gave the woman my most appropriate smile and bowed. I would be delighted, madame. She smiled at me, and for a moment the world glowed as though angels were singing. That smile a doorway into a world of insanity like I'd never seen. I glanced at Penny. She wasn't looking at me, instead staring into the fireplace like it was fascinating. "Penny, would you like a drink? Your mother is doing the honors." She looked up at me with her enormous eyes before she shot a cautious glance in the woman's direction. "I guess so. Hogsnass, mother." Serene Knight nodded serenely and poured 2 glasses of Hogsnass for us. She walked across the room towards me, her eyes questioning as I gave her a slight smile and took the drinks, carrying pennies to her. I knelt before my magnificent witch and offered her the glass of green elixir that bubbled wonderfully. I approved of the green. Penny took it carefully, glancing from me to her mother and back again. "Thank you," she whispered. The gold in her eyes grew brighter as she gazed at me, her curls sweeping to the ground around her like a cascade of autumn leaves. She should wear green more often. Pink was lovely, but her native color was green. Like me, I could burn off her clothing and dress her in green sparks. Or me. Serene Knight cleared her throat, both delicate as well as commanding. All the same, it took effort to pull my eyes from Penny's face. "Your contract is most generous, Huntsman. There is one detail not mentioned. How long is the term of the marriage?" I smiled at her. "Contracts aren't worth nearly as much if they expire. If Penny wishes to end our marriage, she'll have to draw up a new contract." "Would you resist such a contract?" I frowned at her. It wasn't romantic to talk about divorce right before a wedding. There are laws that govern divorce. I intend to follow all laws. If Penny or I wish to part, I hope it's amicable, particularly if there are children involved. Most witches and mages choose to live estranged rather than divorce. That's another possible option. She could also kill me. I gave her a hard smile. I'm sure there are other options I haven't considered. I'm usually very thorough, but to be honest, I have no intention of giving Penny any reason to leave me. Serene cocked her head, clouds of downy pale hair floating around her like a cloud. She looked like a fairy of some kind. The kind that would curse you, put you to sleep for 100 years, and stake your heart to a rock. "You love her?" "I like her. Quite a lot." "Quite a lot. You are the picture of a mage in love. You hardly glance at me, yearning to gaze eternally at my daughter instead." She shrugged and threw a fireball at me. Well, that was one way to change the subject. I wrapped it in water and held it in front of me, the fire dancing inside the water very pretty. "I'm sorry, I'm not sure what the rules are for parlor sparring." Penny sighed and stood, grabbing the ball of water in her hands and spinning with it until she flung it into the fireplace where it exploded with a very nice splash. She sat back down in the wingback while I followed, sitting on the floor at her feet. I put my elbow on her knee like that's where I belonged. Penny's hand eventually found my head. She stroked as though I were one of her pets. Good. I glanced up at Serene and felt the glimmering beginnings of anger. She'd thrown a fireball. If I hadn't caught it, it would have caught Penny. No doubt the witch was testing me, but I was notorious enough already. "Are we having fun yet?" Revere asked, coming in with a tray of crackers and mini sausages. He took them to his wife first. His eyes, when they met hers, gleamed like eyes do when they're looking at their obsession. Her eyes were more nuanced. Her dark eyes softened almost imperceptibly. He was her mage, her pet, her love, but she'd learned to keep her feelings very close. Penny had not. "You missed the first fireball," Penny informed him. He sighed and took the tray over to us. "Would you like a chair, Huntsman? We may not be the most hospitable family, but we don't usually require that guest sit on the floor." "Let him sit at her feet. It's poetic. He's trying to demonstrate his pretended docility. We should allow him that. What will you drink, love?" Hearing her say love like it was ordinary for a witch to speak affectionately to a mage seriously disturbed me, but Penny's face didn't change, so I could call her love and she wouldn't bite my face. Even if it was only a matter of speech, I could, and she could call me something too. "The wedding will take place at dawn," Revere said after he had his drink and took his place on the other side of the fireplace, Serene standing beside him, them looking like a black and white photo, him clothed in black or in white. Beneath the morning star, Serene said melodiously. What was her singing voice like? She was clearly mesmerizing, the granddaughter of the most notorious witch in dark side history, who had ensnared the world with her enchanting beauty. I liked Penny so much better. It was a relief that I was immune to those kinds of things as well as deception mages. It wouldn't do for me to display interest in her mother before we were married, or afterwards, or ever. "I knew your aunt," Serene said to me before she glanced at Revere. "Revere, she loved you very well." He raised his eyebrows. "Did she? What an uncomfortable topic." "Not at all," I objected. "This is exactly the sort of thing I was hoping to hear about, family gossip and all that. What happened? How could you resist a huntsman heiress? What humiliating things did she do in pursuit of you? Did she ever conceal herself in a closet so she could watch you change during a tourney?" Penny yanked at my hair. I kept my face expressionless. "Drake!" she hissed. Serene turned to Revere. She was such a silly girl. "Revere and I were only allies. Revere never intended to marry. He only changed his mind much later. Do you remember the time she broke into Blackheart and hung a flag on the pole with your names embroidered on it? She spelled it so no one could take it down for weeks." I stared at her. I had no idea my aunt did embroidery. "So, how do you go from a Kemp's mage to a spellmaster? I'm finding the transition most difficult." Revere turned to study me. "I spent years studying in Darkside." "And you never planned to marry?" He glanced at Serene. "I couldn't win anyone worth having as a common dayside mage." She took his hand and brought it to her heart. "I would have stayed with you whether you were the finest spellmaster or a simple mercenary. You should not have let your pride interfere with your feelings." He drew his brows together and leaned close to her until their foreheads gently bumped. I straightened up and glanced at Penny, shocked by their wanton behavior. She wasn't paying any attention. Did she truly think that was ordinary behavior for witches and mages, apparently? If Serene was as innocently affectionate with Reverie at school as she was now, there would be no doubt in anyone else's minds that she was intimately involved with Revere. Shockingly so. Revere looked over at me, and the look in his eyes was a warning. I wasn't to say anything about the oddity of Serene's affection. I cleared my throat, but it all turned out in the end. Serene frowned at me. "The two of you should go to bed. It's going to be morning soon." I inhaled sharply while Penny got up like she'd been waiting to be dismissed. "Yes, Mother. You've done very well. Rest and be strong. Revere." She headed out of the room, leaving me sitting on the floor staring after her. When I looked at Serene and Revere, I was struck at the oddity of the situation. Serene hadn't acted like a loony witch. The two of them acted like the most normal married couple I'd ever seen, barring my aunt, who had married a human. Was Ramona trying to achieve this relationship? There was nothing ordinary about it. Could I possibly keep up this level of affection with Penny over a long period of time? I could if she was an aberration, a witch with mage energy. I stood up and brushed off my pants. "It seems I must go. Enjoy your evening." I bowed and followed Penny out. She was already halfway up the first staircase that circled the hall, the waiting soldiers standing at the foot of the staircase, guarding it. I gave it a wide berth and took the steps 2 and 3 at a time until I caught up to Penny. I took her hand and squeezed it. She turned and threw her arms around me. I patted her back. "She doesn't usually come upstairs, so we should be safe. Tomorrow morning will be horrible." "Do you mind if I ask for details? I can handle fireballs and anything else she might throw at me." She pulled away to stare at me. "She'll start talking. Also, she'll want to play with me. You know what that's like. I suppose you can heal me. It'll be fine. Don't turn your back on her, okay? She's very, very good at killing people." I stared at her. "Really?" She seemed quite pleasant. She nodded. "That's because you didn't immediately profess your love." "She hates that. How did you not do that?" I stared at her. "I'm not the kind of mage who loves. Lucky you. Should I carry you up the stairs? You're very, very heavy, but standing here with the statue waiting feels a little bit public." She pulled me close and brushed her nose with mine. "Did you notice the way they touched each other? She only touches him when other mages are around. We don't have a lot of other mages visit, so it's noticeable. I'm not sure if he hates it or adores it. Revere always shows exactly what she wants him to show. He can look helplessly devoted to her or indifferent. She owns him. Not the way we own each other, like deep inside his heart and soul, body and will. He's her Revere, her soldier, her lover. He's the opposite of my father who broke her. Revere put her back together. I can't help but be quite sure that you're the mage who will break me." She shrugged. "I don't really mind." "Yes, carry me up the stairs. Quickly." I swept her up and ran up the stairs, 4 flights of very high-ceilinged floors until I reached the top landing. I put her down in front of the small, arched, dark oak door. She grabbed my lapels and kissed me, her lips hard and hungry on mine, before she let go and whirled around to her room. She opened the door and walked inside. I followed, my lips buzzing and my hands trembling. I was prepared for Wonderland, a forest of candy canes, a pink cotton candy paradise, everything besides the dark room lit by the low burning fireplace that didn't take the chill off the space. Tenny rubbed her arms. Forgot how cold it gets. A sudden, distant scream made the hairs on my neck rise. Is that the doorbell? She shook her head. Close the door. That's Revere putting my mother to bed in the dungeon. Do you scream? I closed the door while my heart raced. What was this new game, and how could I play it to win? I turned to her with a smile, but she wasn't looking at me. She'd knelt on the filthy floor, her golden curls around her as she opened the cage that held Senior Mort. She kissed his nose and whispered something too low for me to hear before she released him. He darted into the shadows. I blinked and the room came into focus. Above us, ropes hung 1 to 2 feet apart, tied to the rafters. Birds nested above us while bats fluttered. It was a very high attic, maybe 20 feet above us to the roofline. The fireplace was massive, old fieldstone that looked made for climbing. It wasn't black, but gray, everything dusty and worn, uncared for and shabby. I couldn't reconcile the attic to my witch. I walked over and picked up the garment bags, running my hands over the covers. Where shall I hang these? Do you have a closet? I suppose we could tie them? I glanced up at the ropes. I have armoires. Over here, by the bed. She spoke softly, the words stilted, and she glanced at me from beneath her lowered eyelashes. I followed her to the left beneath the ropes, so many ropes, until I saw the monkey skull bed. You didn't say that they were monkey skull candle holders. How charming. I nodded approvingly. I wasn't going to object to any bed that had a penny lane in it, but the bed looked 100 years old, the mattress sagging, the black quilt a mess of tears and repairs that had all sorts of embroidery on it like she'd practiced on it. Everything looked sad, abandoned, miserable. The armoire, when she opened it, was filled with black clothing, a few spots of white for contrast. I hung my tuxedo and her dress very carefully while she stood there, waiting. Would you give me a tour? I asked with a gallant smile after I'd settled our clothing together in the armoire. Knowing that my tuxedo was ensconced with her gown made me feel confident enough to take her in my arms and kiss her nose. I adore your garret. It's so authentic. Your pet bats and pigeons are the perfect finishing touch. You've never looked lovelier. She pressed her face against my neck for a moment while her heart pounded against mine. Aren't you going to ask where all the pink is? Am I supposed to? You aren't entirely pink to me. You're more green and gold, like a fiery autumn forest. This feels like a place you stayed but didn't live. She pulled away and frowned at me. Of course I lived here. A tour. Right? This is the bed. To our right, the chimney. Watch your head. This is my workshop. It's still dust-free. Excellent. We'd walked into a space that lit as motion sensors detected us. I winced at the brightness, and it took me a second of blinking to make out the tables and shelves that defined the back portion of the attic. It was a very large space, but ropes still dangled above us. It's very tidy. How do you keep out the dust? Static energy, mostly. The charges keep moving particles moving until they're out of my space. That was a fun puzzle. She walked between the rows of tables, running her hand along the surface with a pleased expression. It sounds delightful. So this is where the magic happens. It's very white. The sterile white didn't match Penny any more than the sad gray and black. She shrugged. It seemed practical. It's not quite because the light reflects, but it's adjustable. Well, that's it. I nodded towards the darkness ahead of us on the far side from the bed. What about that? She chewed on her bottom lip. Right. It's mostly storage where I keep things I'm not working on currently. It's a mess. It's really not what you want to see. Really? It does sound a little bit boring, but you know how I love being bored. Lead on. She made a face at me before turning towards the shadows. She grabbed a candle in an old chipped mug and held it out to me. Light it. I was surprised because she shouldn't need me to work her magic, but maybe it was a manners thing. I bowed slightly and snapped my fingers. Fire flared to life on the candle, the fire golden and beautiful like her. Nothing like her. She was fire and water, her eyes deepest woods and darkest gold mines. I followed her, inhaling her, the dust on her golden locks that I needed to brush off. Her hips swung tantalizingly ahead of me as she held the candle aloft, her glance at me over her shoulder so beguiling that I almost completely missed the body hanging from the ceiling. I stopped walking for a moment to stare at it openly. It was clearly a mage in a dark purple suit complete with purple toe fat. I looked closer and Penny's soft hand was on mine, pulling me back. "Don't stray off the path, mage," she whispered. I glanced at her, then towards the body in the shadows. "Is that your handiwork? I love the purple, so royal. Personally, I favor the pink you made for me. I hope you keep me in it if you ever kill me and hang me in your attic." She blushed so beautifully. "It's not a real body. I made it. I went through a voodoo phase." I stared at her. "I see. I had no idea. How did that work for you?" She shrugged. "It takes more effort to make someone think of you than to simply call them on the phone. That reminds me I promised to check in with Zach once we got here. Come on." I followed slowly, trying to stare at the dangling body and the piles of charred cloaks amidst machinery and other mangled objects that I couldn't possibly identify. Zach would enjoy wading through that mess. I would too. It was like the garbage dump of Penny's mind. When we got back to the fireplace, I pulled out my phone. "The deck roof gets better reception," she said, heading back towards the bed. I followed, still a bit stunned. The roof was past the armoire where our clothing hung side by side. We walked into shadows I hadn't examined well enough to see the cracked glass door. Penny pushed it open and stepped out onto the roof, the cold wind swirling around us. She went over to an old chair that looked like it had been left there for years. She sat down, not seeming to notice the state of disrepair. I followed, picked her up, and sat down, her balanced on my knees. "What are you doing?" "Checking my messages." "Shh! Don't distract me." She nudged me with her elbow before focusing on her phone. I checked my phone and saw a message from Zach. "Your father came by. He seemed surprised to hear that you were getting married today. He seemed to think that he was invited. It seems odd that he's so interested. What's wrong with him?" "Not exactly ideal." Tenny laughed. "He's giving me a play-by-play of his video game. Apparently he needs more friends." I laughed. "Did it sound as forced to her as it did to me? It would be cruel to inflict him on anyone else." I texted back. "Is he still there? Who else did he contact?" It took a moment for him to reply, apparently to take a break from his video game dialogue with Penny. He came in, but Professor Valio showed up pretty quickly and he left. Didn't like her much. "I don't think he talked to anyone else." "Good. Be careful with him." Zach responded immediately. "Define careful. I'm a Stoneborough. Paranoid is part of my DNA. Congratulations on making it to Penny's mysterious home. You've completely fallen off the map. I think it might be between worlds. You're completely untraceable." "Good. Penny's room is different than expected." "Not pink enough for you?" Lots of dust. Bodies hanging from the ceiling. Piles of mysterious objects beneath the eaves. A monkey skull bed. "Sounds comfy." I leaned back in the musty-smelling and damp, overstuffed chair, staring up at the stars through the crisp, cold night. Comfy might not be exactly the word, but it was something very appealing. I slid my hand over Penny's stomach and inhaled deeply, the scent of dust and strawberry shampoo positively dizzying. I nuzzled her ear. "I love the view." She sighed and relaxed against me. "It's nice. In the dark, the world could be perfectly beautiful just out of sight. Or perfectly beautiful in sight. You are beautiful. Your world is enchanting." "You like dust and bats?" "Very much, but not nearly as much as I like you. Ah, Penny Lane, I could spend every night on this roof with you, overlooking a sea of stars, the wind cold, you warm, the world utterly perfect. I will do my best to be your reverie. I will do everything in my power to make you happy. I adore it when you're happy. I adore it when you're unhappy as well. If you'd rather be miserable, I'm content with that. I'm so bewilderingly content." She turned her head and nuzzled my neck. "You're such a strange mage. That must be why I love you so much." "In that case, I'll try to be as strange as possible." I held her in my arms for a long time, warming up so I could keep her from freezing, but it was too cold and her arms were bare. I stood up and carried her inside. She blinked up at me sleepily. "Where are we going?" "Bed. We have an early morning ceremony to attend, or have you forgotten? I adore your bed. It's remarkably grotesque. They look like real monkeys." I set her carefully down on the black quilt and took a moment to run my hands through her hair. "I'm going to change with your voodoo friend. I brought a pair of very warm pajamas. Do you dress slowly or quickly? I'd hate to surprise you." She inhaled and glanced down at my chest. "I'll be quick." I pressed a kiss to her forehead and turned, marching decisively towards my bag. This was not the time to show her my pink boxers, probably. In the shadows beneath the purple-suited mage who hung like an authentic dead body, I quickly changed, jumping when a mouse scurried by my bare foot. A moment later, there was a little mouse scream and the crack of bones. "Signor Mort." I stared into the shadows until I saw a flash of eyes before they vanished. Her house really was like a horror movie. Odd that she got so freaked out by them. I shook my head and stripped down, careful to keep my mage jacket out of the dust. Finally, I was pajamaed and barefoot. My phone buzzed a text message. I almost didn't check it, but I might have dressed a little too quickly. I'd hate to surprise Penny. No, I'd love to surprise her. I could climb up in the ropes and watch her dress. If only I'd thought of that sooner. No, my rope work wasn't nearly good enough. I'd probably drool on her or something. I heard something above me, a hiss. I looked up slowly, and there in the shadows, a darker shadow seemed to absorb light. I couldn't see it, not even with spells. I shook my head and grabbed my phone. My hand was not shaking, even if there were odd black holes in the reaches of Penny's attic. "Congratulations. I promised you a secret. Do you want the fun one or the really fun one?" That had been earlier. The more recent one went as follows. "Your bride is an aberration. You know that. What you don't know is that she also has no magic. No magic. No magic. No madness. You are the luckiest mage in the world. Eat piss." Zach was clearly drunk. He'd never misspell piss otherwise, or say I should eat it instead of drink it. I knew she was an aberration, a witch with mage energy, but the part about having no magic was he being literal. Tenny never used magic. This attic was empty of magic. The white lab part was full of energy, but not magic. My heart pounded and my skin buzzed. Penny had magic. Witches who were three-quarter Darksider had a lot of magic. Zach was just messing with me. If it was true, I closed my eyes, ignoring the hissing above me. I sat down on my pile of clothes and stared into space. I was 7 when my mother died. She was so beautiful, blonde, and graceful. She played the piano and sang, but only for friends. She would glance at my father, and he'd nod at her because she only played for him, however many people gathered. She was his witch, adored by him with every breath in his body. She never looked at anyone else like she looked at him except for me. She was allowed to love me. She'd loved me so much. Love for me killed her. If Penny never had to do that, never had violent rages where her Darksider consumed her humanity and anything else in reach, she'd never beat her children to near death and then kill herself as her only way to save them from the next time when she wouldn't be so gentle. It was a long time I sat in the shadows beneath the purple-clad body until I heard Penny calling me. I blinked dampness from my eyes. It must be from the dust. Penny would be such a lovely mother if magic and madness didn't break her.
Blooming Black, Chapter 25. I dressed as quickly as I could, but my fingers fumbled on the buttons of my black nightgown. I braided my hair loosely over my shoulder and went to the bed. I rolled the blanket back and slipped under the blacktop sheet. Drake had taken the black very well, just like he'd taken the limo ride, the body, and my mother. I'd tried not to stare at him, but while I'd been in the parlor with him, the light was so green and golden, I couldn't help but admire the sharp angles of his cheekbones, the lines of his eyebrows. He was very angular, filled out, yet sharp. Stars and triangles, he was beautiful. Pitch hissed in my head, and the world grew darker as my skin buzzed. I wanted to play with the pretty mage. I shook my head and said out loud, "Touch him, and I'll seal you so deep inside me that you cease to exist. Also, he's my mage. He's my pretty sweet bird." You know what happens to anyone who touches my pets." The black specks filled my eyes before I could blink them away. He was too pretty. I wanted to give him more scars. I closed my eyes and tried to relax, breathing in and out while the darkness came close and heavy. I love him. I love every part and piece of him. I'm marrying him tomorrow. I'm never going to hurt him. For a moment it was a close thing as I struggled with the buzzing, hungry darkness, but it eventually melted away into the shadows of my attic. I sat up and tugged on the end of my braid. I pulled my blanket up to cover my cold shoulders while I waited for Drake. He'd been gone a long time. Was he poking the body? "Drake," I called, my voice echoing back to me. A few minutes later he came blinking into the light of my lit bed, the candles in my monkey skull holders glowing all around me. I'd taken great delight in how macabre it was, but now it seemed tacky and pathetic, like I couldn't be a real witch, so I had to be a pretend one. His smile was seductive as he raked his eyes over me in the bed. "Did you miss me?" Worry, I strayed off the path. Don't worry, I had Senior Mort to watch over me. "Do we keep the professor in his cage?" I nodded. "Yes, I'd hate for Senior Mort to eat him on accident. I like your pajamas." They were black and white, striped with tiny hearts every few inches. He glanced down and smoothed down the fabric. "Thank you. They'd be better if they were pink. But they didn't have any my size." "Can I climb in bed with you? My feet are getting cold." I nodded and pulled back the edge of the quilt for him to slip inside. He took a second to brush the dust off his adorable bare feet before he swung in and burrowed down, pulling me with him until I was in his arms, his nose against the side of my neck. I blinked up at the ropes that dangled from the ceiling. He hadn't asked about those. He growled in my ear. Are you comfortable? I should have brought more pillows." "You smell nice. Do you mind if I hold you like this all night?" "Maybe I'm too bumpy." I turned my head and kissed him until his body softened around me. Pitch hissed from the corners of my mind, and I pulled away. "Drake, are you sure you want to marry me? You might get tired of me? You might get tired of me." "I hope so. Otherwise, I'd never sleep." He kissed me twice, slow and tender, before he sighed and rolled over, stealing the blankets. "Hey, thief." I tugged on the blanket until it was all on top of me, leaving him curled up adorably on the black mattress. He leaned on his elbows, staring at me with a peculiar smile on his mouth. He moved suddenly, trying to get the blanket, but I pulled it away, overbalanced, and would have fallen onto the floor if he hadn't caught me around the waist and pulled me against him. I laughed breathlessly, my chest rising and falling against his, while he stared at me until he touched my face, fingers careful like I was breakable. "The quilt is on the floor. I hate to mess up your authentic witch garret, but would you mind if I spelled the dust away?" I shrugged. "I'm not particularly attached to it. I know that you're a rather clean mage, what with your laundry obsession." His fingers slid from my cheek to my neck, sliding along the side down to my shoulder and the neckline of my black nightgown. "I look forward to doing your laundry for the rest of your life. I adore your laundry almost as much as I like the witch inside it." He stood suddenly, bending to pull the quilt off the ground. He shook it roughly, sending a puff of dust into the air. Lines of green light spread through my attic from my mage, and when the quilt settled down on top of us, there wasn't a trace of dust I could see. He settled down and shifted until I was spooned against his chest. I could feel my name engraved in his skin, and he kept contact with my shoulder where I wore his initials. I felt at once alive and exhausted. "Tomorrow you will be Penny Huntsman, my deliriously sweet and brilliant love." I swallowed. He'd called me his love. It didn't mean anything, but my heart glowed with happiness anyway. I lay awake in his arms for a long time with his steady breathing behind me until the candles burned low and guttered out, leaving me in the dark with Drake. "I love you," I whispered before I drifted off to sleep. I woke up to a tray being thumped on my legs. "Good morning, Penny Lane. I made you breakfast. Eggs, bacon, sausage, hash browns, 3 kinds of toast with a variety of jam and marmalade, since Revere informs me that you are a marmalade fiend, and cereal heaped with berries and nuts, so you can feel like a squirrel. He said you were very squirrel. He said you were very squirrel. Like..." I opened my eyes and stared at the mage past the piles of food. He'd forgotten to mention the stacks of pancakes drenched in syrup. He was so beautiful, red hair glowing in the candlelight, dark eyes dancing with clusters of green glowing brightly. "What happened to your pajamas?" He nodded towards the armoire. "I put them in the drawer below. I hope you don't mind. I used your bath after I found your bathroom. I filled the tub for you and spelled it warm. The plan is for you to eat, bathe, dress, and then meet us below in the sunroom. Do you need anything else?" He leaned over and kissed my nose. "You look ridiculously adorable, all mussed and soft from sleep. I wish I could climb in the blankets with you, later." He grinned mischievously and brushed my nose with his. My heart fluttered at that soft touch. For a minute after he straightened up, my stomach was in such knots I couldn't possibly eat, but he put a sausage in my mouth and somehow cured my lack of hunger. He laughed and left me to my breakfast. Maybe to clean the kitchen. He was a very tidy mage. Was this how marriage was? Breakfast in bed and warm snuggles all night. I could get used to that very quickly. I ate and ate until the tray was polished, but I saved some nuts to give the professor. I petted him and snuggled him for a little while before I put him away. I danced around my attic, wandering around until I remembered that I was supposed to take a bath. The water was perfect and filled with green bubbles that floated up without popping when I disturbed them. That whole corner of the attic where my copper tub sat was filled with glowing bubbles above me, green, reflecting me and my candlelit bath. I washed my hair using Grandmama's best stuff, then conditioner. My hair would take ages to dry. I shook it out and ran my hands through it. The floor around the tub was warm. In fact, the entire walk from the tub to the armoire was warm, but when I stepped to the side, it was cold. He'd heated a path to the armoire for me. My chest ached for a moment from the sweetness of the gesture. I dressed slowly. Layers of delicate underthings and silk stockings, slips, and finally the gorgeous silk dress that slid over me like a dream. I zipped it and it fit as snug as a glove while the skirt floated around like the curve of a petal. I twirled and laughed, arms spread as though I could capture the happiness in my hands. I twisted my hair up, letting part of it tumble down, fastening it with Grandmama's diamond pins. Put on soft, delicate makeup, and then the perfect blush pink slippers. I was ready. As I walked to the door, I noticed the lack of dust and the scent of roses that swirled up with every step. On the landing, I paused. Thousands and thousands of flowers were attached to the railings that wound down to the hall, and the waiting soldier was a massive heap of blooms, so you couldn't even see the tip of his spear. The floor was covered with rose petals and candles glowed everywhere, hovering in the air just waiting to drip wax on an unsuspecting passerby. Distant music played like falling water, glistening and perfect. My heart tightened and my skin got prickly. It was too beautiful. It couldn't be real, but I didn't have dreams like this. I didn't want to blink and miss the beauty even for a moment. I walked slowly, holding my skirts up as I stepped carefully over the velvety petal-strewn steps. Every step felt like falling further and further in love. When I reached the bottom step, there was Revere, standing as still as a statue in his typical black suit. When he offered his arm, I blinked for a second before I rested my fingers on his sleeve. "Your mage is ridiculously nonsensical." He insisted on personally arranging every petal. I'd call him a fop, but the effect is quite charming. "You look very sweet." I blinked at him. I think that's the idea. I see. I'm certain that he'll adjust to pitch as well. I've rarely seen a mage so happy. It's a dangerous thing. Be cautious. We entered the sunroom, which had been cleared of its usual clutter, and instead it had sconces filled with blooms, and Drake playing the old painted piano, the formerly out-of-tune instrument producing sounds of such dizzying beauty. I was certain Drake had enchanted it until I saw his hands moving over the ivory. His hands were so strong yet slender, precise yet tender. He played the final note, then turned and stood in a smooth movement that looked choreographed. He walked towards me like a prince, shoulders strong and broad beneath the perfectly fitted tuxedo. He wore a top hat, and Professor Cadaver was eating a cookie on the brim. I sobbed and covered my mouth before any other sounds could come out. My lips were trembling. I sniffed and tried to keep the messy emotions from boiling up. He took my hand, and I floated to him, coming to a rest in his arms. He brushed my cheek with his fingers before turning and leading me over to my mother, where she stood in the light of the dawn, the morning star clearly visible behind her through the large sheet of glass. She looked past me. "Signor, you have the appropriate licenses?" I turned, and there was Signor Ludi in the dark shadows, his expression sober. "I do." "Will Signor be marrying us?" I asked. Drake smiled at me, his dark green eyes falling to my lips. "My precious treasure, isn't that delightful? Your dearest dark side friend will perform the ceremony." He also delivered the flowers. Such a useful and multifaceted friend. Drake's voice was warm, low, so beautiful, I couldn't help but lean closer and closer with every word that fell from his perfect mouth. "The moment has come?" my mother said in her annoyingly mystical voice. Drake seemed completely immune to it. I squeezed his hand tightly and inhaled deeply. It smelled like candles, roses, and black cherry. We walked towards her and then turned sideways, so she was on one side while Signora was on the other. Revere witnessed from his place beside the piano. I gazed at Drake while he held my hands, his eyes filled with dancing specks of neon green. My mother chanted while Signore started reading about the purpose of marriage and the importance of said marriage in quite medieval language. His words blended with my mother's gibberish until I couldn't make out anything other than my own heart pounding wildly beneath my rib cage. When Drake's phone buzzed, it broke the spell. My mother cursed colorfully while Signore scowled, and Revere rolled his eyes. Drake shook his head, looking embarrassed, but it kept buzzing and then ringing, and he finally pulled it out. "Sorry, this will only take a moment." He stepped away and muttered, "This had better be some serious nonsense." And then he stopped moving, his body seeming to freeze up as he listened, his back turned towards me. "And those other accounts I asked you to watch." His voice was already different, not irritated and excited, but cold and businesslike. He could change so quickly. "Yes, I see. I'll call you later." He lowered his phone and took his time clicking off. He stood there facing the wall for a long time before he turned suddenly and walked over to me. "Do you mind if we have a word for a moment?" He took my wrist and dragged me out of the room without waiting for me to answer. "Drake, you don't have to drag me." He glanced over his shoulder at me, his eyes brilliantly green but icy cold. "Do you mind?" "I hope so." He continued dragging me up the stairs until we reached my room. He walked in and sent me stumbling in the direction of the fireplace while he started undressing. "What are you doing?" He raised an eyebrow. I believe the phrase is calling off the wedding. "You see, it has been brought to my attention that you have no magic. You're a very charming girl, but not wife material, not to huntsmen. If you had been upfront from the beginning, we could have avoided this unpleasantness. Such a waste of flowers." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. "Do you deny it? Do you have magic?" "A spoonful. A drop. No. No. No, you're a girl with a great deal of energy passing herself off as a witch. I do enjoy a good deception. Well done. You almost caught me. He tipped his top hat to me before taking Professor Cadaver off the brim and tucking him gently into his cage. Why do you need a witch with magic? Power, genetics, the continuation of the glory that is Huntsman Inc. It's about business, Penny. I'm a businessman. My family is a business. That's what you should understand about peers. Huntsman is about two things, magic and money. Combined, they equal power. Without either of those, we're not the foremost family in Dayside. I swallowed. And that's what you care about, being the most important family in Dayside? He looked shocked. You have attended Rosewood, haven't you? Did you not notice the pressure to be the best? I am the finest peer you will ever meet. Therefore, the most materialistic, obsessed with power, glory, prestige, and money. I could overlook a lot of things. Your family's obvious lack of social and political standing, but I can't elevate you to my level without the basic elements of money and magic. That's what the accounts were. Something about my lack of magic. That makes no sense. He studied me. It was a business call that included that information. I'll be blunt. Viney was overheard by one of my employees chatting with Zachary about your lack of magic. They're very loyal to you, but I'm personally disappointed that they never felt the need to enlighten me about it. Apparently, they're more invested in you than in me. That's an error on their part. Stoneborough will pay for it in business. I grabbed his sleeve. Wait, you're going to penalize Zach for not telling you about me. You can't do that. He cocked his head and pulled his shirt out of my grip. You are mistaken. I can do whatever I like. I'm Flaming Drake Huntsman. Things grew dark and strange then. I started laughing, the mage in front of me looking like a doll, a puppet that I could so easily break. He didn't want me without magic. Drake frowned at me, his face so funny. What's wrong? You are so adorable. You think that I'm worthless because I'm Penny Macaroon Lane, the stupid little bonbon that can't control herself, much less someone else. You think that I'm too weak to be a threat. You think that I'm too weak to be a threat. You dare to threaten my friends for being loyal? You thought it was cute when I needed your protection spell. It was cute, wasn't it? The thing about protecting me is that it keeps me from getting too angry. Do you know the first time my mother burned me so that I could learn to harness the flames? I don't. I don't remember times she didn't burn me. Have you ever been burned by Ferris flames? It wouldn't matter. You have resistance inside of you. Do you know what happens when you take all that pain, years and years of pain, and stuff it inside of someone? Do you know what comes out? Do you want to see? His eyes were worried, his hand reaching towards me. But it was too late. I moved, a rush of wind, a breeze of ash, and threw him across the room, energy and anger mixed with that one thing. Pain, he crashed into a timber support and sparked green at impact, so he didn't break his spine. How nice for him! I ran through the air and dust, the ropes above me like magnets moving me as I spun, my hair a cloak around me. I landed on him, kicked his solar plexus, spun, and smashed his knee all in a blur of ash, space, time melting away into nothing but pain. That's how it felt when I let my pitch come out. He finally moved, rolling to his side and taking a defensive stance. I crushed it, slipping inside with a whirl of death. He was slow, like lead melting in the sunshine, slow and heavy, and I was the wind. I was pain. I was his pain. I was his pain. I kicked him back into the enormous stone chimney. He hit his head, and it bounced. He stared at me, his eyes wide with shock. Again. His voice was a rumble, an avalanche. Your pitch. That's why you chose Zach. He was already bound to you when you cut him to the bone. He looked sick, and it might not have been from the concussion. I'd cut Zach, right? Bitch, right? Drake was bleeding because I'd hurt him. I wrapped my arms around myself and dug my nails in, scraping deep in my skin. Deep, deep, until thick trails of blood plopped from my elbows to the floor. I stood there watching my blood make impressions in the dust until Drake grabbed my shoulders, my hair, my arms. I put my hands on his face and pulled the pain out of him. He didn't need my pain. Not like this. The room got fuzzy, but instead of falling down to the floor, Drake caught me, holding me close while he carried me far away. I woke up tied to my bed. I opened my eyes, and Drake was sitting above me on the headboard between the two monkey skulls burning cheerfully. He wore the purple suit with gold striped shirt that he must have gotten from my life-size voodoo doll, Andy. The dark purple top hat perched over his eyebrows at a rakish angle. I twisted my head to check the knots he'd put in the rope. But it wasn't a rope, and they weren't any kind of knots I could recognize. You tied me to my bed with my hair? Do you want to die? He grinned widely. We all die eventually. So, your pitch. It's a pity you didn't kill me when you had the chance. I'm not going to be surprised a second time. I tugged on my wrists, but it hurt my head and the knot slid without giving me a clue to their direction. I shouldn't have healed you. You took advantage of me when I was unconscious. That's not very gentlemanly. He tipped his hat. So glad you noticed. I didn't ask you to take my pain. It's one of my least favorite things about you. The way you wander around taking people's pain without asking if they're using it. I almost had a new scar on my head to add to my Penny Lane collection. What did you do to my hair? It takes forever to get knots out. He stepped down from the headboard, making the mattress sink along the left side where he walked until he stepped over my body, studying it with his eyes, gaze turned hungry. It's secured by magic. You and your hair aren't going anywhere. You see, without magic, you are helpless until I'm done with you. If you'd stayed pitch instead of healing me, you'd be in control. But either I am your weakness, or your sense of compassion is. Now, Penny Lane. We are going to discuss this issue without any delightful distractions. No fighting, just you tied to your bed in your ripped and bloody wedding dress. He closed his eyes for a moment while his teeth pressed his bottom lip. You look ridiculously good in purple. I should have dressed you in that for the wedding. He cocked his head, eyes glinting dark. You'll have to find another mage to dress. I suppose you can make more bodies to hang in your attic if you can't find the perfect mage. Why did you agree to marry me? I stared at him. I love you. Don't distract me with irrelevancies. You aren't the sort of creature who gets married or goes to school without a purpose behind it. Is it to break the curse? I shrugged. I felt drained even though I didn't seem to have any of the injuries I'd given him. Why didn't I hurt? Did you heal me? More irrelevancies. Can you not answer a question? My heart pounded. He hadn't left as soon as I'd lost consciousness. He was still here. Maybe I could convince him that pitch was as valuable as magic. I went to Rosewood to marry a peer so that I could fulfill the demands of my grandmama's will. Otherwise, my mother will die. His eyes narrowed. Why did your grandmama want you to get married so badly? By your 18th birthday. I nodded. I don't know. She didn't want me to end up with a mage like my mother's first husband. She wanted to make sure I found a nice Daysider mage who wouldn't eat me. Because I'm vulnerable. It's true, I am not as strong or as invulnerable as a regular witch, but I have pitch and pain. I can defeat anyone with magic. I've been able to defeat my mother since I was 14, and she's the most terrifying assassin in Darkside. I know I get emotional and attached. I'm kind of needy and weak, but I can create things that no one else can imagine. I'm not completely worthless, Drake. I'd make you a good wife. I'd help with your business and whatever nonsense you needed. His lips pursed. I'm almost convinced, but there's still the matter of children. Would our children have magic or not? I'd hate to watch a child tortured by its peers from its lack of magic, like you were tortured. It would be bad for business. They have to be superior from birth. I looked away from him at the gleaming copper bathtub and the water that still steamed slightly from his warmth spell. I don't understand. Do you not care about me at all? Care? He laughed, a musical sound that turned hard. I'm a mage, Penny. It was a delightful game making Penny Lane fall in love with me. But it's come to an end. You're right. You are a valuable asset, but for another mage, not me. He leaned forward and brushed my forehead with his lips, his breath catching while the scent of black cherry swirled around me. Tears crept down my temples when he pulled away. He brushed them away with his fingers, then licked them while he studied me, eyes darkening and growing emptier and emptier and emptier, as his emotions drained away, leaving nothing but the mage behind. For a woman who agreed to be married for the sake of a will, you're very emotional about it. So many emotions I can almost taste them. I wonder if I could feed off your emotions. Such a puzzling creature. Someone should study you, but not this mage. He sighed and dropped to the floor, adjusting his cuffs meticulously. Drake, you signed a contract. My mother isn't going to let you leave here alive. He glanced at me over his shoulder, a cruel smile on his lips. Oh, she will, he corrected, his voice hard, eyes a wasteland of pain and anger. He cared about me. He had to. He couldn't love me so perfectly if he didn't care even a little bit. Drake, here is my proposal. Marry me, torment me for the rest of my life, and I'll do my best to make your life interesting. You'll miss me. The wolf in you needs a sweet he can chew on. Please, Drake, I don't want to lose my best friend and true love. He sighed heavily. Such sweet words. I'll remember them and you with fondness. He tilted his head while he stared at me. I shifted beneath that stare, the hunger in his eyes making my stomach clench and ache. He leaned forward and brushed his lips over mine. Perhaps I should have seduced you before I broke your heart, but I don't have time for a prolonged farewell. I have business to attend to. I snapped at him, barely missing catching his soft lips in my sharp teeth. Go then, go and worship your precious business. At least you can love something, even if it isn't flesh and blood. He brushed my cheek with his fingers, and I jerked again, trying to bite him. He pulled away just out of reach. Such a charming creature. Your anger is particularly stunning on you. And the dress, I didn't think it could be more delicious, but ripped and blood-stained is precisely what it needed to achieve perfection. A roar outside brought his head up. He started towards my balcony door, then whirled around, took off his hat, bit my bottom lip with his sharp teeth, nipped my nose, then pressed a hard kiss to my forehead. I will remember you fondly. He replaced the hat on his head with shaking fingers and strode purposefully towards the doors to the roof. Drake, wait. I'm not that kind of mage. Give my apologies to your mother. He left in my voodoo doll, Dandy's dark purple suit, bag over his shoulder. He put his hands up and green light spread along the glass until the doors opened. Nothing exploded like it should have if someone unauthorized tried to open my balcony door. Once he stepped outside, my hair relaxed, falling down around my shoulders while my ankle bonds released as well. I rolled off the bed and dashed outside in time to see Drake leap off the roof. I gasped and then heard a thunderous roar and the heavy beating of wings. An enormous creature rose above the level of the roof, his scales heavy and dark green like alligator skin. Its eyes a neon color that matched the stars and triangles on Drake's skin where he sat, perched on the monster's shoulders between its leathery wings. He tipped his hat before the dragon shot away, disappearing from sight in the direction of Rosewood. And there I stood in my tattered wedding dress, jilted by some red-haired